being a couple of minutes past 7:15, welcome to the Norton Planning Board meeting of January 22nd. Other than internal business, we have an A&R endorsement plan for Fernandez Circle, followed by continuances of a couple of public hearings, first of which is a special permit 479 for Blue Star Business Park on Leonard Street, and then, although it's not a special permit, it is a special permit, Blue Star Business Park Special Permit 481 for Building 7, and then followed lastly by Special Permit 482, Fairland Farm Solar Next Sun Energy. Just trying to clean up internal stuff real quick. We have a bill schedule for $95, which is basically a reimbursement to Paul for his payment for joining the Association of Professional Planners and for the Massachusetts chapter, which is a total of $95. Have people seen this? Was that on the Dropbox? I don't see it.
No, sorry.
Okay. I'll pass this around and folks can look at it. Although we don't have it here, and I don't know which set of minutes we need to approve for, is there a last meeting of the?
Yeah, January 8th. Are these included in there? And the answer is no, they weren't
All right.
included in there.
Although it was on the Dropbox, we can wait till our next meeting to approve the minutes of January
They
8th.
were emailed, but
Okay, so if anyone wants to make a motion on the bill schedule of $95 for reimbursement to Paul.
Move to approve.
There is a clerical error on it. I'm not sure if that matters to you, Paul, but there's a spelling error on it.
On
I'm
chapter?
not sure if that matters. No, Massachusetts.
Oh, well, there's also chapters.
Guys. I'll fix it.
well,
No worries, I'll
Yep,
fix it.
My sense is that the accountant will understand the intent of both Massachusetts spelled correctly.
or my name misspelled anyway.
Yeah, it would probably be more problematic if the check was made out in the Paul Smith.
Would be a nice name to have.
Yeah.
In any event, is there a motion to pay the $95 reimbursement?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Say
Aye.
Opposed? Done. Okay. Our folks from Condyne, way out in the hall. Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies. Can you give us a little sense of what is being requested, Paul?
This is, an A&R is being requested to create two lots out of one on Fernandez Circle. So I don't know if the applicant is here.
What's the gentleman? I pronounce his name, but I butcher it. Mr. Butkevich? Thank you. Is the applicant here? Candid, when I was looking this, I didn't fully understand it, so.
Oh, yeah, sure. Check and see if he's in the hall. Okay. Again, this is a proposal to take a one lot and subdivide it into two lots along Fernandez Circle, which is off of West Main, just a bit west of Mansfield Ave. And apparently the applicant is not here. In my review of this, I identified to the applicant a couple of concerns that we had asked for him to provide some responses to. The biggest aspect in this is an access to a vital access to the lot. For two reasons, one of which is the new lot, a lot of the frontage is through wetlands. And the second issue, which is the driveway access, which it's through some sort of utility easement, which could create some challenges for approval. We had asked him to address that, but we didn't receive any updated information, and
He did say he was going to be here today.
he did say he was going to be here. Okay. So,
All right, so again, he's creating Lot 2.
yes.
The access would be through this utility easement, says see detail, which,
Right here.
okay,
So here's the utility easement, but it looks as though it's actually being accessed from the existing driveway, which now all of a sudden you've got a common driveway.
All right, that was going to be my question, Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a common driveway if it serves more than 2 or more lots. So you would need a special permit to do that.
well, why couldn't he use, this is the entry point, there's, I haven't got a scale, that looks like it's about 20 feet without touching the no-touch.
That's certainly.
It would have to be, but you'd be extending, that's not what's shown on the plan, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's no driveway shown in the plan.
Well, there's a
That's just
driveway
access
to
Right.
utilities.
existing house
Right.
3, and then there's an offshoot off of that
The gravel,
driveway.
yeah.
That says
Right.
existing gravel drive. Is that what you're looking at, Steve?
Yeah.
That's-
Existing driveway.
It's an existing driveway, it's paved.
Right.
So it was.
So
20 years
where
ago.
was it, where he
Oh,
was
right
asking
here,
for
okay,
access
yeah,
wasn't,
Existing gravel drive, yeah.
Oh, okay. So,
right. But where he was specifically asking for the driveway wasn't clear on this.
And it
Was-
kind of extends across the line here, this existing gravel drive.
Right.
Yeah,
Straddles both
Yeah.
properties.
right.
So
So,
he'd need a special permit for a common drive,
yes,
because he has no way of getting,
if that's the intent.
right.
I can't answer that.
Yeah, what's the intent of splitting the lots? What's the plan?
I believe it's just to create another lot, another developable lot.
Yeah, for what purpose is, yeah,
Yeah.
the question, but
in
if the
your
applicant's not here.
discussions with the applicant, was there any specific timing that they were looking to have this completed by, or was this something that maybe if something came up on their end, that we could see them at our next meeting?
We didn't have that
Do we-
discussion. This sounded more, he did not mention that they had any eminent plans.
Well, given he's not here, but he may be here, is there a motion to table this to later on tonight? And that if not, we can either deal with it or continue it to our next meeting.
So moved.
Seconded.
A motion and a second to table to later on tonight.
And who seconded?
I'll take it,
okay.
yeah.
Folks, let me just hold on to these plans for the moment.
Frank?
Come on, put this over there, Paul, I don't want to run it over.
Man,
Okay,
Steven.
Solving for a moment. Chris, would you mind hollering down to the folks from Condyne? Thank you. Folks, just so you know, I'm assuming, and if I'm assuming wrong, then correct me, but a lot of you are here for the solar farm. That'll probably be at least a half an hour before we get to that, so you're certainly welcome to sit in on this. Evening. We'll do 1 through 5 because that's first on the agenda, but we've had a little of this discussion. If you could fill us in on what the status is of the definitive subdivision. It's been filed for, and it's scheduled for,
Your next meeting.
which is February 3rd or something, 5th?
5th. So we have received it, the notices have gone out,
Okay.
and the reviewers have it.
Again, unless someone corrects me, process-wise, we really need to act on that before we can wrap this up. The other set of loose ends is are there any outstanding issues in terms of waited for responses from Horsley and Witten, or any responses that you folks need to make to some of the points they made?
We believe a response is still coming from Horsley and Witten. You know, we filed back on December 7th, responding to their comments, and typical, the way these things work is they'll respond again, you know, we work through, so we have not seen any feedback since our submittal on December 7th. That's almost 2 months now. There was some intermediate questions that we responded to prior to the holidays regarding performance standards for conservation. But
Okay, for conservation, but not for,
Right.
I just want to, you know.
they go
in-house
hand
do some-
in hand, but yeah.
I understand that, but is there anything that you're waiting for, or we're waiting for, from Horsley and Witten as pertains to 1 through 5 from a planning board perspective?
No,
I-
we're not waiting for anything.
No,
Okay.
those
I
are,
just-
We had
again, I
two-
just,
I think we made a lot of progress on, you know, those, on the site planning types of issues. No, we're just waiting for conservation.
all right, because that's, I don't want to call it a loose end, but that's obviously an issue that if in fact they have changes that may force you to make changes to what you've submitted to us, then again, we can't go forward till that's wrapped up. I want to make sure that we, you know, can stamp into, in terms of process, where we're at. So unless there are other issues that remain unsettled, I don't know where we go to on lots 1 through 5 at this juncture. Orin?
One, has a new plan been issued other than the August 26th plan? I know that there's been,
You know, I haven't got,
Yeah, yes.
has the
There's
one,
been
Been some
changes.
revisions to it. They've been,
I haven't seen one. I apologize, I was not at the last meeting. I did watch the tape of it, and without trying to reinvent the wheel, that there were some questions that came up that I've raised. One was, I understand there's some discussion with with Paul and with Chris relative to the square footage, the width of that street, and where they were talking about 36 feet. I just question whether or not I don't believe that's necessarily something that this board has signed off on. And my sense of it in reading 10.10, I don't believe, I almost believe they may need a variance in order to do that.
Well-
It's a requirement of the bylaws, and under 10.10, it's basically says, in addition, specific conditions of applicable sections of the bylaw must be met as a condition to granting a special permit. So, one, I don't know that this board, as a board, has signed off on less than 50 feet, and the question I raise is, under the bylaws, whether or not we even have the authority to do that without securing a variance.
We've granted variances, and that's something that was brought up, and I think maybe you raised it, Orin, in an email. I think it does make sense to itemize what, if any, variances from the bylaws, and clearly the 50-foot driveway requirement is something that we've kicked around. My point being is, if there are other variances that you need in terms of what you've submitted, probably ought to itemize them so that we can act on them and put them to bed. Frankly, on that issue, East Main Street, at the intersection of Leonard and the driveway exit to the Dunkin' Donuts and that little plaza, is 28 feet. Went out and measured it myself. So for my purposes, 36 feet. I'm not an engineer, but I've read a tape measure often enough in my life where I can measure 28 feet, and that's exactly what it is. Pavement to pavement is 28 feet from the exit, from the do not enter sign to the other side, just east of the Leonard Street intersection. So 36 feet is was recommended. Again, I'm speaking for myself. This is clearly something the board has to act on. It's not, to me, out of the question. But A, that's something that's going to be voted on as a variance, and B, if there are any other variances that need to be, I'm not aware of any, but again, it's your application, so just let us know. But in terms of tonight, I don't know if there are other issues that we want to examine that haven't already been examined on lots 1 through 5.
I have a few others.
Okay?
Well, just to respond to what you just said, the driveway you were measuring was a commercial driveway. This is for an industrial use compared to
No, I measured East Main Street.
East
I
Main.
didn't measure, I didn't care about
Okay.
the commercial driveway. I just, frankly, taking a logical approach to this. If you had a feeder route that's feeding something, if anything, I wouldn't expect it to be larger. The feeder route, i.e. 123 East Main Street, is 28 feet. So 36 feet internally from a 28 feet feeder seems to be logical to me, but again, that's just my approach. But here again, I want to get this to a point where we know what we've agreed on and what we still have to agree on, and put this to bed one way or the other, notwithstanding the fact we can't act on it tonight in the absence of a definitive.
Yeah, as I mentioned, and I believe you were picking up on, my experience has been with the Board of Appeals, with respect to a 40B project, it was the applicant, especially given a project as complex as this one, we keep on getting plans, and one of the things I'd like this board to consider going forward is when we get a revised plan, I would like, and it's not, I understand where we are now, but going forward as a process, it would be helpful if we can have the applicants provide a summary of what changes are made to those plans, because in absence of that, we get a revised set of plans, and we have to go through all of it, unless you're going to have it go out to somebody else to review it. I don't think this board is in a position to understand and find every single nuance in those plans.
No,
I would put the onus on the applicant, any applicant, to identify what changes they've made to a particular plan that's been filed.
Right, but as part of the last meeting and other meetings, some of those changes were discussed.
I agree, but not all of them. For example, there was a note that was on that file that talked about the driveway to remain, this is the driveway on 123, remain until a new entrance is available. I don't know that that was brought to anybody's attention, and I'm not sure what that was referencing. This is on 123. You had a note on the plan that I saw that said that the current driveway was to remain until a new driveway was made available. Is that the plan?
Not exactly sure what you're talking about, but I mean, right now there is 5 driveways along here, which will be combined into one. Potentially, there was a note to allow access to this building here. There's some existing buildings that would be in place until buildings 2 and 3 would come along. And the intention for that is to use this driveway. Otherwise, I'm not too certain what the comment is.
You mean from a short-term as construction
Yes.
perspective?
Correct.
Okay. The other thing that was of a note to me was throughout the MEPA process, as I mentioned before, I think there was a note that talked about we weren't concerned as long as the parking requirement remained the same, whether or not they designated those as retail buildings. In checking through my notes, if I recall, the first meeting we had of this project, this question was raised and the applicant represented that it in fact was retail. Subsequent to that, beyond what was filed in MEPA as being 25-foot buildings are now designated as 35-foot buildings. And I don't know that that's something that MEPA has reviewed, and certainly I would suspect if they were planning on doing a second level for offices or something like that besides, I don't know what the purpose of the increase was from 25 to 35, which is what was filed with MEPA and approved.
I don't have the 1 through 5 title sheet. Do you have that title sheet? I mean, there intended to be single-story buildings built to 25 feet. If sheet number 1 says 35 on buildings 1 through 3, there's no intention to make these any taller than 25 feet.
Okay.
So I can just make that revision if it says that. I'm not aware of that, though.
That it does. And then there was, oh, yeah, in your MEPA filings, it was always represented that your sewer was going to be running down 123 from my reading of your current plans, has that changed now? Is it going somewhere else?
It's still running down 123. It's coming out of the pump station and heading across the highway all the way to the hump in the road is where we're going to
Do
connect
your
it.
plans reflect that? I wasn't able to find that.
It's, the force main is shown to where it goes off-site, and from there, we have a second set of plans currently in front of the Water and Sewer Commissioners meet, and eventually, I think for work in the right-of-way, we'll have to go to the selectmen. It's just a single force main sewer line. It's also going to go through MassDOT.
And what's the status of that before the Water and Sewer Commission?
They have reviewed it initially, gave us some comments back, and they described that we gave them everything they were looking for on the project, and the next step will be going in front of the Tri-Town Sewer, the MNF, or MFN, whichever one it is, Sewer Committee. But we do not foresee any issues with that, but it'll need a notice of intent for a crossing over the Canoe River, but it's permitting that will be following this immediately. It's in process, plans are complete.
How is your timing for that in connection with the anticipated work the state is planning on that 123 main?
We had a phasing meeting with MassDOT and the state, and Town of Norton was there as well. And we are basically going to be in first before the lights, before the roadway widening. We're well within the restraints that we need to do to get the sewer line in first. Just has to be in first.
Yeah. And your phasing in MIPA call for putting in all utilities prior to, as was phase one, was putting in those utility lines. Now, does that include the light on East Main Street and Leonard Street?
The intention is for the light to be in as well for our project prior to occupancy. Our light, we're not within control of MassDOT to have the intersection lights, but they're scheduled for either fall of 19 or spring of 2020.
But I believe the traffic report and analysis was based on mitigation, which included the 495 traffic lights. Is that correct?
Yes.
I don't know whether our traffic has evaluated, the traffic consultant evaluated the project without those lights? To give us a report on that?
I think, all right.
Both our engineers have evaluated it, and your engineers had no further comment. So,
Well, that was based on the mitigation. Everything you presented to MIPA and to our traffic consultant, included the mitigation for the traffic lights at 495, is my understanding. Is that correct?
495 we are not any sort of mitigation for 495 intersection. It's completely unrelated to us.
But that was what, my understanding is MIPA asked you to provide mitigation for what you're doing, and one of the phase of mitigation that you presented to MIPA and we presented to our traffic consultant included that mitigation at the 495.
The mitigation encompasses the whole area of what's happening, whether it's MassDOT or whether it's what we're providing. So all that's encompassed in the MIPA filing, so everyone has an idea and an understanding of exactly what mitigation's going down 123 and across the bridges.
And as you understand at this point, MassDOT's timeline for the lights is still roughly lined up with occupancy of the first building of the park.
Correct.
Roughly.
Pretty close to it.
And again, you mentioned this at our last meeting, and my memory is such that I've completely forgotten in terms of phasing, which buildings we're going to do first.
Yeah, so building 1 will be first.
Okay.
Or 5, so I'm sorry, building 5 will be first.
And timeframe? Ballpark.
As soon as possible,
6
to be
months.
completed earliest possible, September, October of this year.
Okay.
The next building would follow 3 to 4 to 5 months after that, so Building 1 could align with the earliest possible of 495. If 495 ended up in the spring, it still most likely would be only Building 1 traffic, so,
And then
So building, I'm sorry, building
building
5
5,
first, and
4, and
then
I'm
then
sorry,
7,
yes,
correct?
5.
building 5.
Keep saying
and then
1 as the first, but 5,
Yeah.
sorry.
5, 4, 7.
I'm
Yes.
sorry,
Correct,
5,
5, 4, and 7.
5, 4, 7. Yeah.
Okay. I thought last time we said 7 was potentially first, so it's 5, 4, and then 7 across.
Correct.
And then the retail, 1, 2, 3, subsequent to that.
Right.
Okay. Good question, Joe.
Pays to be forgetful, so I had to bring it up again.
yeah. And just reiterating what you had mentioned about, I think they asked actually for, my reading of it is basically they need to comply with the zoning bylaws. If they're asking for some waivers beyond that, they ought to be able to identify those. My only concern is that I don't know that we're in a position to grant variances. I think that does go to the ZBA, and I don't know whether we can or we have.
We've granted variances to some of our, we've granted lighting variances. I don't recall whether we've granted any driveway width variances, but that's something that we can clearly get clarified.
They've always been,
In
yeah,
past practices,
been a
yes.
waiver,
That's.
but it's been
again,
classified as a
I'll
waiver.
confess for probably the 5th time tonight, my memory is not always on target, but I do recall that the planning board did grant variances, and in order to make sure that you don't end up with any problems down the road, I'll confirm that the planning board does have the authority to grant waivers to whatever it is you ask for, and if we don't have that authority, we'll let you know.
Yeah, I think they were just termed waivers, not variances, that's all.
Any other questions on 1 through 5, given the fact, noting the fact that we can't wrap it up tonight, pending both the definitive and any consequences of what the Conservation Commission may do. So this is not by any means done yet tonight, but I don't know that we can move any further on this.
Question on conservation, will they be meeting before we meet on February 5th?
I believe they are.
Next Monday?
They are.
Yes.
I want to make sure conservation has enough time. You mentioned the notes were December 7th, so do you feel that conservation should have a response by the time we meet on February the 5th?
I haven't had any conversations with Concom. I don't know if you have, or whether.
No, well, with the agent, but they'll be reacting to the information that Condyne has provided.
Yeah, I frankly think we have to play the cards we're dealt, and if the Concom hasn't acted, then we have to, wait until they're finished, because here again, drainage, retention ponds may be altered, and we want to approve something that's finalized. So, any other comments on 1 through 5? And if there are none, could I entertain a motion to continue special permit, whatever the number was, 479, or I don't have it in front of me,
479.
to our next meeting of February 5th, is it?
So moved.
I'll second.
Is there a second? There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? That does remind me of one thing that you and I had a conversation kind of offline about whether there is a form that needs to be certified, that if you miss a meeting, I think a number of us, myself included, have missed a meeting, have watched and made up that meeting under the Mullen Rule. Is there a form that needs to be?
I spoke with the town clerk, and she did not think that the form would need to be completed, so.
But I think for the record, Frank's missed a meeting, Oren's missed a meeting. Anyone
I
else?
think I missed one.
Okay.
Did you miss him?
I'm sorry?
Did you miss a meeting?
Oh, that's what I just said. I missed a meeting. Have you watched the meeting that you missed?
I believe I did, but I'll double
Okay,
check. It's the right one. I believe I did.
Can we just put, and I can't remember now the one I missed, but whichever one I missed, I did watch. It was a fairly long one. But for the record, if we put in the minutes that I did watch and review the minutes of the meeting that I missed, then I can get that meeting date for you. And whoever else may have missed the meeting, if they have watched and/or reviewed the minutes, if you could state for the record that you've done that. And if, Steve, if you're uncertain, then certainly at our next meeting, you could let us know. Have you had a chance?
I did watch.
I'll double check. I know I missed a meeting, but that was October. I have to look and see what was on the, if we had opened up the public hearings
Okay.
on this at that point.
All right.
You need a written statement or just a?
No, I think just something in the record that indicates that you're qualified to vote on the special permit by virtue of having made up that meeting.
Gotcha.
Because you're allowed to miss one.
Julie, you're still going strong.
Yep.
I missed the January 8th meeting, and I did watch the entire meeting on video.
Okay.
Okay, so let's record that, so.
Okay. And I'll get that, at least in my case, the meeting date that I wasn't here for. All right. So we've continued this special permit to February 5th, which now brings us a special permit and site plan, special permit 481 and the site plan for Building 7, which was continued. So the floor is yours. Here again, was there anyone that missed that meeting? We've only had one, correct, on 7?
Yep.
It's just,
I'm sorry?
it's just.
Right, and so Orin missed that one, but you did watch it?
I watched the video.
Okay, so I think Orin was the only one who missed that one?
Yeah, the first one, we opened it, but there was no discussion. so
Because
Frank
we
left,
continued
so, yeah.
immediately because of Frank's absence, so. Floor's yours.
Again, Mark Dibb with Condyne Engineering Group. So we did submit a revised set of plans based on comments from both the town planner and Horsley and Witten. I can just quickly go through that response. It's my letter dated January 15th. So based on the stormwater management standards, Standard 1, they noted a bunch of criteria, and we basically met Standard 1, so that is closed. Standard 2, so number 2, A is just a comment. B is some comments on an infiltration basin. We've made those revisions to the plan, label a storm scepter, provided a detail for the emergency overflow. Infiltration basin 2 had similar comments. We provided those technical details and made those technical revisions. Number 3, infiltration basin 3 was just a comment in general, so that is closed. And number 4, we identified that we are not affecting the 2 vernal, one potential vernal pool and the other isolated wetlands. I identified the NRAD shows the areas that are contributing to that, and we did not reduce those negatively, so we believe we're not going to affect those.
Mark, I'm sorry, could you point to those again for me, please? That was.
This is L,
Uh-huh.
and again, the ANRAD has that full and this is K.
Okay.
This one was identified as a potential vernal pool, and this one is an isolated wetland, which really doesn't have any jurisdiction by conservation. And this was also isolated, but it had a vernal pool in it. So it doesn't carry any buffers, but it has the requirements set forth for vernal pools. And basically the comment was potentially, are we, affecting existing runoff to those areas enough that it could affect those pools? And we believe we're not, based on the contributing areas that were shown on NRAD. They're not on these plans, but because it was kind of technical information that is not needed for the site plans. So on to Standard 3. Again, just a minor technical change on an outlet structure, orifice. Recharge volume calculations were adequate. Standard 4, just provided some additional information for the storm scepter. 4A. 4B was that same outlet, just a technical detail. C, we just added some details in grading regarding these bioretention areas and how the runoff gets to those and how it leaves those. As well as the landscape plan. I could show that, but we've provided all the bioretention area plantings for that in a detailed landscape plan prepared by a landscape architect. Standard 5, we just revised a detail showing the the grass filter strips to be lined, as well as B, bioretention areas to be lined. C, we meet that criteria. Standard 6, A and B are just comments. C, we've provided recharge that does not degrade groundwater quality, so we meet that standard, the drinking water regulations. D, again, is another comment about the bioretention areas being lined. And E is kind of just a compilation of all these edits together, put into the HydroCAD hydrologic calculations that was provided and revised. Standard 7, redevelopment is not applicable. It's closed. Standard 8 is related to the control construction-related impacts in the SWIP. We did provide a draft SWIP in the resubmittal with as much information as possible for the SWIP. B is closed, the comment that's closed. C, we've added a wood chip berm detail. There are no existing silt catch basins anywhere along Leonard Street, so we're not adding anything for that. The limit of clearing has been on the plan. It's just this one area coming across. We did not, and that will demarcate which trees, by setting the limit of work, that clearly demarcates which trees will be removed. So any trees outside the limit of work are proposed to be protected by that. And we've been using orange silt fence, instead of the black, it's orange, it really stands out. So we've provided that. The stockpile area has been added to the plans, or was on the plan, I believe, and then a note that it be staked in the field as well has been added to the plans. Number 9, regarding the O&M, we submitted a BMP location plan. Basically, all that did was clearly identify the BMPs, which are the infiltration basins, the storm scepters, the bioretention areas, and that's a supporting document to the O&M. That should be in the O&M plan. The snow storage areas have been shown on the layout plan throughout. I can pull that sheet up if needed. Number 10, illicit discharge, that's closed. Hydraulic calculations, some more technical stuff. We added some labels regarding some of the piping. North arrow scale bar have been added. Contours were adjusted slightly, a couple little tweaks it needed, and the stormwater checklist within the report. I've provided a stamped checklist. The 13, regarding review of low-impact development. On the stormwater checklist, there's certain things we check off throughout the project, and one we checked off was minimize disturbance to existing trees and shrubs. One thing we did not do was go out and identify any large mature trees in this area that we're clearing. I've identified that, tree clearing outside of buffer zones, there's very minimal area that is upland or that is in wetland buffer zones. and has mature trees. There's a slight little piece here, and a slight little piece there. We feel by building where we're building, we're maximizing the area that's been farmed. It's just grassland, so, the percentage of tree clearing area compared to the project area is only about 5% of all this work we're doing. Only about 5% of it has some trees, has any trees at all on it. So we feel we've situated the project to meet that low-impact development item. Use of country drainage. The final design resulted in only small areas that allow the runoff to sheet flow into swales, into bioretention areas. It was checked on the plan. Originally, we did have some, we were trying to propose some up in this area, but again, we kind of got away from that in order to put the drainage in the grassed areas to limit tree removal. So, country drainage, there's a small amount of it, but it's not a main focus of the project. Bioretention cells, we do have, we're treating this portion of the project, and some of Leonard Street is actually getting added treatment. There's no treatment at all from Leonard Street, so we're actually proposing some stormwater management for Leonard Street. And water quality swale, we actually have a grassed swale, so we can revise the checklist and uncheck that. It's a slight difference. There are two acceptable BMPs, but there's a slight difference between them, so we can just uncheck that item. We do not have any water quality swales. And landscaping, to the extent we could propose drought-tolerant species, those our landscape architect has added some of those that we've always used as much as possible. Review of compensatory storage. Item 15, we actually reduced the storage lost for the project, but when we made we notched the building and moved the roadway out of the riverfront area, so it actually created a reduction of compensatory storage, but we're still going to provide the same amount, so we're actually providing now additional storage.
Mark, just to confirm, I know this was discussed at the last meeting, we are still going to, the tick of that building is still within the floodplain?
Yeah, again, we're an overall, that was an area of fill anyways. Prior, it was fill before, now it's fill again, but now we're less fill.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
We provided documentation that this compensatory storage is within the same reach. This is one big wetland. So at the same flood elevation, it's all tied together hydraulically. So we provided that documentation. 17, I think I identified a very sliver that could possibly be fill. It's more than offset by the fill with the additional fill we're providing. 17 and 18. By providing the compensatory storage, we're not raising the surface elevation of the flood more than 0 inches. 19, for this building, any building, the O&M goes with it, a tenant manual goes with it, all the instructions regarding BMPs and how to maintain them are provided. Condyne could be the owner, tenants, but it's all provided to anybody using the building has that information. 20, the test pits were performed at a time of high groundwater. We had tables to show that. So groundwater shown on the plan should be historic high groundwater, meet that requirement. 21 is similar to a previous comment. We've provided the recharge necessary to meet that item. 22 is just a comment. 23, right now we are proposing a irrigation well, but again, we've minimized irrigation. It'll most likely just be along this driveway in this very small part in front. We are proposing a well.
Where's the location of the well, Mark?
I have it right here.
Okay.
Riverfront area 24. We provided a riverfront analysis. Again, we've removed the access road out of this side of the green line. And part of the analysis was also, because we still have a basin partially in the riverfront area, in the analysis, we could propose a basin up here, but again, we're removing trees. We feel it's a more suitable location, even though it's partially in the riverfront area. It's just a better design for the project and based on the constraints of the project. Flood zone, number 25, we've identified that. 26 as well, we've addressed or looked at the vernal pools. And 27, there is a small portion of the site within the 25-foot no disturb zone that conservation has a policy for. We are touching that area slightly for the bioretention, and the reason it's also picking up Leonard Street, so it needs to be in that location. But again, it's in the grass area. We're not taking down any trees. It's in formerly used agricultural area. We believe there should not be a problem with that. I think the benefits of where this location is, and that we're actually able to capture some of Leonard Street that's not previously being maintained, and that there shouldn't be an issue with that item. So we've provided those comments. Paul's comments, we submitted a letter, and it's not too much. We did added a couple trees on this edge of the parking lot, made some legend revisions, but that was about it for that.
And the responses to mine looked great.
So, board has any
And I guess in the
questions?
same, again, in our conversations that Chris Carmichael had with you all, as staff, we're fine with a 30-foot wide drive here, particularly because of the low volume of traffic, that this would be primarily truck traffic. You wouldn't see, obviously, retail. And then the 30 feet is also important because of the proximity to the environmentally sensitive feature. So we were considering the trade-off of a wider road impacting the environmentally sensitive land. So that's our recommendation to you all.
Do we expect anything back from Horsley Witten on your responses to their comments? In other words.
On the planning side of it, no, it's the conservation.
Right, I just want to be
Yeah,
clear
correct.
that we're not awaiting anything else from Horsley and Witten based
Correct.
on your response to their comments.
No, and in fact, with this, the contract for this one, unlike what we did with 1 through 5, the site plan review aspect fell on me. So their focus was stormwater and wetlands.
Okay. Questions from members of the board?
Is this on the agenda for the Concom as well?
Yes.
Okay, so you're gonna do both Mark 1 through 5 and 7?
Yes.
Okay. So to Frank's point, we'll have to await feedback on both those items.
Anything else? and I don't know that it will be impacted. You're looking for some approvals for some widening of Leonard Street, improvements to Leonard Street through the Board of Selectmen. Impacts from those anticipated improvements vis-à-vis wetlands will be handled by the Concom, I assume, as part of their.
Correct.
normal
That
process.
is also on the agenda for the 28th.
Okay.
So, again, I just want to know what, if anything, we're awaiting as a planning board prior to being able to take action. And I think as it pertains to this permit as well, if there is a list beyond the 30-foot driveway of waivers that you need, I want to make sure that those are itemized so that we're not missing something.
Okay.
Anything else? Then hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to continue the special permit and site plan review until February 5th.
So moved.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Now the moment you've all been waiting for. What we have next on the agenda, unless, help me with the name again for the,
Butkevich?
is Mr. Bukevich here? What I'd like to do is open up the public hearing on special permit 482, Fairland Farm Solar, Next Sun Energy LLC, application for a site plan and special permits for large-scale ground-mounted solar facility located on a cranberry bog. Is the applicant here?
And can I just
Absolutely. If you
just
could-
provide some background into that? As you'll recall, back at your last meeting in December, you had made recommendations for town meeting on language to promote a couple different aspects of solar facilities, one of which was allowing solar on the cranberry bogs. Well, last Monday at town meeting, those amendments were approved by the public. Last Thursday, we submitted the article to the Attorney General with a request to expedite the review, particularly because of, as you'll recall, one of the issues is with the smart solar energy program. There's an allocation that's been largely absorbed. So once we hear back from the Attorney General's office, we'll know if those changes were approved or not. So again, it went forward. So the applicant has also submitted a special permit and site plan for the construction of solar facilities along the cranberry bogs along Bay Road. And I guess just as one point of clarification on this too, is that this is, the solar facility is about 60 acres of the entire site, of the site, not the entire site itself. So with that, we have Adam and Stacy.
Sure. Stacy Minahan with Beals and Thomas, representing Next Sun Energy. Adam Schumacher is with me as well. And I thought if it's the board's preference, I can give an overview of the project and then answer any questions that the board or other attendees may have.
We just need to make sure you're speaking into the microphone.
Okay, thanks. All right, so we submitted an application to the board requesting site plan approval, a special permit for location in the floodplain district, and also a special permit for the proposed solar use, because at the time we submitted, we didn't know the outcome of town meeting in terms of allowing the use by right. So the two that remain applicable are the site plan approval request and the special permit for location in the floodplain district. So what's proposed is a dual-use photovoltaic and energy storage facility. Dual use refers to terminology in the state's recently issued new incentive program, the SMART program that you've heard reference to, meaning that the solar panels will be located on cranberry bogs that will continue to be actively cultivated for the life of the solar project. And so this board depicts some renderings of, to give kind of scale perspective, the solar panels are 10 feet tall, and these are some people standing so that you can get a sense of height. I'll just flip through them so that you can see them and then move on to this specific project. So the panels are tilting, they're tracking panels, they follow the sun, and so these different views are those panels in different positions. So this is angled kind of midday when sun is directly above and they're flat. And then angled from the other direction from a kind of higher perspective looking down so that you have a sense of it. So the property where we're proposing the project is about 183 acres. As Paul mentioned, the panels are located on about 60 acres of the cranberry bogs. The site is located west of Bay Road, just south of the Easton Town Line in the R80 zoning district. So in terms of locus, it's the existing cranberry bogs in this vicinity of town. All right, so I've colored the index plan so that the board can see the overall site at once, and I'll run through some features of the project. So the site currently contains active cranberry bogs, and as I mentioned, they'll continue to be farmed organically after the solar installation is put in place. The panels cover about 60 acres of the existing cranberry bogs, and the proposed access is from the existing site access off Bay Road right here. So on this sheet, the yellow-ish color are existing disturbed areas associated with the active bog operations, the sand track agricultural roads, some of the wider areas around. The blue are reservoirs, as well as a bypass canal and Mulberry Meadow Brook that flow north to south. And then the light maroon is the cranberry bogs that the panels are proposed over. There will be gates incorporated at the existing Bay Road entrance. I think, as Paul mentioned, but I may have missed it, the interconnection is proposed on the adjacent property at Fairley Lane, so the interconnection is proposed here. And there'll be a gate incorporated at that spot as well, where the two properties meet. The equipment and staging areas, so the inverter and battery storage equipment, are proposed behind the existing storage building on the property. And they are proposed to be raised on skids because portions of this property, including that area, are located within the 100-year floodplain, hence the special permit request. So they'll be raised on skids so that there are just piers touching the ground so that the floodplain capacity will not be negatively impacted. That area is disturbed as well. It's a sand track, sandy, kind of very little vegetation associated with the existing operations.
Quick question, please.
Mm-hmm.
Could you identify the main entrance to the property off of Bay Road? That's up at the top?
Yes, right,
Okay, and
right here.
And that down at the bottom, is that a road off of Bay? Okay, and what is that?
So that is frontage that the property has, but there's no existing access there. There's no road or drive that I'm aware of. So the proposed access is here.
Okay, thank you.
So it's part of the lot, but not connected to the road necessarily.
The lot is connected to the road. There is frontage here,
But there's no,
but there's no formal, place that you could go, physically. So the interconnection that I mentioned will be overhead wires on utility poles running over to the Fairleigh Lane connecting point here, and then down this existing road that's there, and there are also existing poles there associated with the solar facility located off-site. There's an existing solar facility there that's interconnected at that same location. The racking for the panels within the bogs will be mounted on either hydraulically advanced driven piles or helical piers, helical screws. That's done to minimize the surface impact within the bog. There will be narrow trenching for the underground electric conduit connections as well. That's depicted on the plans. That's a temporary impact. It'll be restored to cranberry bog once the conduit is installed. It's similar to how irrigation systems are installed in cranberry bogs during agricultural operations. We looked at the stormwater management for the project site and included a stormwater report in the application. Because this project doesn't change ground cover types, it'll remain bog or sand track area. There aren't any formal BMPs, best management practices for stormwater necessary. There'll be no change in the pre and post condition with regard to stormwater management. We also included with regard to the floodplain and engineering certification that the floodplain will not be negatively impacted by the proposed work, again, because the structures are raised on piers to minimize impacts to the capacity of the floodplain. So this type of solar project doesn't have the impacts typically associated with residential, commercial, or industrial development. On this particular property, because it's a dual-use project, no trees need to be cut. There's no sewer or water demands, no traffic increases, no increases in greenhouse gas emissions. There'll be offsets from the renewable source, which goes well with Norton's intent to become designated as a green community. And there's also a payment in lieu of taxes being proposed as well that'll result in $4 million for the town over the next 20 years. So in our application, we provided a fairly detailed listing of the applicable criteria and how we met them. I wasn't planning on going through all of that because I think it would take some time, but I'm happy to if you'd like me to, or I can just answer questions. One thing that I did want to discuss, because it's one of the points that we would like feedback from the board and others in attendance, is the screening for the proposed project. So we have evaluated it for the abutters to the west, as well as abutters to the south, east, across Bay Road. And we can screen the project on our property, but doing so would require probably 1,200 linear feet of vegetative planting. We looked at whether a berm or fencing could be utilized, but I don't think it would be an effective screening mechanism, so I think vegetation would be the best option. For the abutters to the west, there's also opportunities to perhaps incorporate some screening, so instead of just along here, in this corner of the property as well. For the Bay Road abutters, we don't control this area here, and so I think coordination in terms of whether screening could be proposed on various abutters' properties if they're interested in that, or stipends towards that. So that's a topic for discussion, is the screening for tonight.
On that east side, are there residences along Bay Road on the west side of Bay Road? Or no?
No.
Okay, so you said you don't control that parcel of land that's owned by others, or?
Correct, yeah. The black dark line is the property line, so we don't control this.
They don't control.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we could,
Yeah.
suggest maybe planting within the trees that are there, some evergreens or something, but it's not within our site control.
Yeah, and that's the one area, as I drove past this lot, of pretty wide open at that point, as you get closer to the eastern line. I mean, obviously,
Right.
not so much down there because there's enough of a gap. from the
Woods, yep.
street. I'm just thinking of car driving, and what that visibility might be or could be, given time of day, direction of angle of sun, and so forth. And that area is pretty wide open once you get just north of your main access point.
So in proposing the screening, I think a mix of deciduous and evergreen makes sense. Paul had provided us with what was undertaken at Clap Road as an example, so we'll certainly keep that in mind as we, advance the design for the screening. But in a nutshell, I don't think I missed anything major. Adam can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the project, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Members
Not
of the board first?
Yeah, not to continue to hammer on the screening point, but on the overhead satellite photo, they see the road coming in from the east, right here. Yeah.
Are you here?
I think a little bit further south, but close enough. But that's the area where you say you don't have access to control the screening.
So,
And so the panels are going to be tracking the sun. So when the sun is rising in the east, they will be pointed in that direction, which from my high school geometry would point the sun right up that street. Is that-
So the trackers are always directed, or are always facing the direction of the sun.
Right.
So if the sun is pointing directly at the panel, that the light will be absorbed by the panel, and any refraction from the panel would be in an angle kind of either down to the ground or up to the sky, if that makes sense, during the morning time. So it's not going to reflect directly back
right,
in the angle that it's coming from.
because the panel is not like this, where
Yeah.
you would,
Okay, yeah.
And the solar panels themselves are, they're manufactured to absorb sunlight rather than reflect it. So it's actually, it's less, the glass that's used on top of the panels is less reflective than standard glass used in windows. And so typically glare in a residential or a street situation from solar panels is not, it has not raised safety concerns.
Could you just, I guess I was never a Boy Scout, but can you just draw north on that?
oh, sure. Sorry, that's supposed to be one of my first things that I do. So north is up on this plan set.
Okay, so if north is up, are those panels, although they're drawn there north and south, I assume they are pointed, notwithstanding their deployment, they're pointed south and not east and west?
Typically, so this design is different than the standard solar projects that you see throughout the majority of the state at this point. So this is a single axis tracker, and so the rows are oriented north-south. So for example,
Okay,
in this case, we're looking from the south, and they're tilted at 0 degrees, but then they track from east to west
Okay,
during the day.
that was the point of my question, thank you.
Question on screening. How tall will the screening be, whether it be vegetation or a possibility of a fence?
So a fence, I mean, typically anywhere between 7 to 10 feet is a standard fence, but I think certainly for the abutters to the west, a fence would not be effective because of their increased elevation over the bogs. In terms of vegetation, we'd propose a variety of heights, so some various height shrubs as well as various height trees, so that you get kind of screening the full height, and that kind of speaks to the Bay Road observations. I think where there are trees, there's not as much of an understory. So what we'd propose would be similar to the photo you sent of Clap Road, where there's kind of different layers. The maximum height, I would say, absolute max would be 50 feet, but that may be a bit tall for the area and depending on where we're doing it. So one of the challenges to plantings on this property is it is sand because of the bog operations and the sand track roads, so there's not great soil. It's very exposed in terms of getting very hot when it's hot and very cold when it's cold, and there's also a lot of wind, obviously, that crosses across the property. So challenging planting conditions. That being said, there are things that will grow there. Species may grow better on abutters' properties as well, though, and there may be opportunities for different types of species there.
Now, will I don't call it a facility, but will the lands be maintained throughout the year? There's a budget, and from the property will be maintained?
Yes, yeah, it'll be actively farmed as a cranberry bog throughout the year, as it is now. You know, harvesting and all of that. And then in terms of sand track roads, they would be maintained as they are now. Panels, we had included in O&M. There's certain things that you look for each year, an operation and maintenance plan. So, yes,
Steve
it
and
would
Joe
be
will
maintained.
back me up on this. There was, no kidding aside, some vegetation will be eaten by local habitats, like deer.
Yes,
So
yeah.
there were trees planted with a lot of money, and within the season,
Absolutely.
deers ate it, and it was pointless. So
Yep.
make sure we have trees that are not edible.
Yeah, as deer resistant as possible. Yep.
And a diversity
Yes.
of
Yeah.
species, so, right, for that and other, bugs and whatnot.
We had 2 residents send us emails on questions about a possible mosquito issue, where if the bogs aren't being maintained, or if so, trying to explain with solar powers on top of it, will that create more of an abundance of a mosquito issue?
Yeah, and I had a chance to look at that, I think, early this afternoon. And my initial thinking on it, and Stacy, please jump in if you have any other thoughts, but when you look at those rows, they look, the solar panels look pretty dense there just because of the scale we're looking at it from. But those rows are actually 20 feet apart on center. And the solar panels, it's a single row of solar panels in a north-south direction, and the solar panels are 6 feet, about a little over 6 feet wide. So you've got 20-foot spacing with solar panels occupying 6 feet of that.
Okay.
And they're raised 10 feet above the bog. So my understanding of the mosquito issue is that additional shade and dampness may create better breeding grounds for mosquitoes.
Okay.
And my assumption would be that because of the substantial amount of airflow and sunlight that is still penetrating between and underneath the panels, that it wouldn't create a significantly different environment than the bogs that are not covered. That said, I think, if it's a significant concern, I'm from northern Wisconsin, and we have mosquitoes as large as hummingbirds up there, and we use propane-powered mosquito. They basically attract mosquitoes and then suck them into a big bag. And so we'd be willing to look at installing a few of those along the property line if that would make folks more comfortable. But yeah, I think in terms of the actual solar installation causing different or better breeding grounds for mosquitoes, I don't expect that would be an issue. But we're happy to look at mitigating mosquito issues on site, like I said, with some propane-powered mosquito traps.
Paul, would that fall under the scope of environmental peer review or not?
Well, we are going through an environmental peer review. Again, it is on conservation, the flood, wetland issues, but
I don't know if that's in
we
the
could
scope or
certainly
not.
ask, as part of the review, I can ask the conservation agent if they'll look at the mosquito issue.
Regarding the height, I have a couple questions. So there's mention of 10 feet. At that 10-foot point, is that the midpoint of the panel that's mounted? So you had mentioned 6 feet. Does that mean total maximum height would be 13 feet, 7 feet to 13 feet?
So, yeah, 10 feet is when the panel's horizontal.
Yeah.
And then they track up to a 45-degree angle. And so the lowest point of the panel would be somewhere around 8 feet, and the highest point would be around 12 feet.
Okay, so 45-degree angle is the maximum.
Right.
Okay, so to, in essence, go back to the question of, any possible reflection, you're at a 45-degree angle, it's not gonna ever be at a 90-degree,
Right.
straight on position, okay? In terms of your organization, your company, what experience perhaps you can share with us in other cranberry bog installations you've done? Give us some, background and flavor to that, how many you've done, how long ago, how long have those been operable? If you could, please.
Sure. So the dual-use agricultural program is new to the state and the country, I would say. So we do not have any active dual-use projects, and to my knowledge, within Massachusetts, there aren't any dual-use projects operating. There have been some recently approved, like in Carver, on cranberry bogs. So we do not have any operating dual-use projects. We have a sizable amount of operating normal solar projects. And so this is, the application of solar in this agricultural setting is new, and so it's something that the Commonwealth has decided it wants to pursue and incentivize, and so this, I think, is we're definitely on the front edge of this happening, and I think you'll continue to see this come up more and more, especially here in southeastern Massachusetts.
And one thing I would add to that, although it was not a project that we at Beals and Thomas were involved in, we had tracked it and are very familiar with it, and my colleague, who's also a professional wetland scientist, had gone out recently to look at it. So in Carver, there is a standard, and by standard I mean the typical height that you see for ground-mounted solar project on a cranberry bog there. And the bog actually looked much better than she was expecting given the low height of those panels. That was a unique situation where that farmer decided they wanted to harvest the vines rather than the berries, so they didn't need the equipment access. But that cranberry bog, continues to be farmed for vines, and the cranberry vines themselves are quite healthy, and it looks like a typical cranberry bog just with lower height solar on top of it than what we're proposing
When you
here.
say lower height, what height are we speaking?
I mean, typically it's like, what, three at the bottom and 7 at the top?
Yes.
Okay. And how long is that? Do you know how long that's been?
I think that's been in place a few years.
I think no more than 3 years.
Yeah.
And I think it took, because it wasn't a dual-use project and they weren't concerned about the ongoing activity of the cranberry
Right.
operation, they didn't use very much care when they were constructing the project, and a lot of the vines were damaged pretty severely. So it took a season or two for them to come back, but now that they're back, it actually looks very healthy.
That actually leads to a question, but just process, Madam, I see you raise your hand a couple times, not you, but the process, we're going to let the board ask questions, but I assure you, you'll have every opportunity to ask your questions, but one of the things that, you mentioned a dual use, this is a dual use program. You don't own the land, I assume you're leasing, or however that arrangement is. In other words, you're not responsible for cranberry production.
We actually will be in this case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, I'm assuming the property up until now has enjoyed some type of an agricultural exemption from a property tax standpoint. Typically, nobody monitors that for productivity, but under this program, is there, because you had mentioned earlier there'll be trenching for wiring, there's obviously, depending on what you use for either piles or helical screws, there'll be disturbance of the bogs. Is there a performance standard in terms of productivity of cranberries that you need to meet in order to maintain, I don't know.
Be in this program.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so there's not a specific yield requirement. When the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Energy Resources developed the dual-use guidelines, they recognized that many things can influence the productivity of a farming operation, climate, weather, any pest, like, a very bad pest year. So they didn't want to set specific yield requirements compared to historical yields, because it may not be just the solar panels that are affecting the yield. So there's a requirement that we continue to maintain the property in active agricultural operation, and to us, that means adhering to best management practices. And we also need to report our annual yields as well as an annual operating crop plan to the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Energy Resources. And if they are concerned about whether or not we are actually upholding our requirements under the program, they can audit the site and if necessary, take away the dual use incentive.
Other questions from members of the board? Frank?
I just want to talk about the noise levels and sound pollution, if we can call it that. Someone told me that every panel makes noise, and someone told me, no, it's just the inverter pad that produces noise. Could you tell us about this?
That's true. Solar panels themselves don't make any noise, and I'd welcome anybody to go over to the Clapp Street project or whatever solar project is nearby and get close to the solar panels. You'll notice that the solar panels themselves do not make noise. The inverter makes noise as part of the process of turning DC electricity, which is produced by the solar panels, into AC electricity, which is what is fed into the grid. And I sent a map to Paul earlier, and I think he circulated it.
Yep.
And so those noise levels are based on a white paper that was commissioned by the inverter manufacturer. And you'll see once you get beyond 100 meters from the inverter, the decibel levels drop to a point of basically ambient noise in a rural setting.
Could you give us an example of that said sound?
I know we have it,
but people.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what pamphlet Paul gave you, but at least the one I was looking at, when you're between 30 and 40 decibels, that's the typical noise you would expect in a quiet rural, during the night in a quiet rural setting. And Paul, I'm not sure if you have something different than that.
We do. Just looking at decibel levels in a what they would call a moderate range of, like a decibel limit at 40 would be library, a quiet urban nighttime, or even a quiet suburban nighttime. If you get to 50 decibels, what this study is indicating would be a dishwasher in the next room, but a quiet urban daytime. 60 is actually normal speech at 1 meter. Large business office. So those are, when you think about us talking right now, that's about 60, 65 decibels.
Which is only experienced within 10 meters of the inverter.
So by the time it hits Bay Road from the inverter pad, where are we? Are we at 50 or 30 or not
You're
even?
somewhere between 30 and 40.
And there's only the one inverter pad located for this
Correct.
facility.
You have two, but one is
There's
pretty
one,
deep into the project.
There's only one inverter pad with two inverters on it.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
And the location of that on the property, is that more for convenience, or is that the best possible area to keep the noise down?
It's both. It's the most practical position for it from an operational standpoint, as well as from what we need to do to avoid impacts to wetlands. And it just has the most working room around it, and it's also positioned well in terms of noise, because if you look at the area to the southeast and east of the inverter pad before it reaches Bay Road, there's actually a significant relief in the land there, so there's a pretty significant embankment. So I think the noise levels that I've provided are actually going to be greater than what is experienced in the field, because those noise levels assume a flat, open field. They do not assume any vegetative or soil buffer, which we do have in this case.
Can you just position, is that, just judging from those drawings of buildings near the inverter, is that Blueview Nursery?
Yes.
And you also mentioned that the inverter would be on piles or stilts,
A
whatever.
skid, yes, yep.
How does that either hinder or amplify sound transmission? Do we know?
I don't think it changes. I don't think it changes it. The decibel rating, and this was, I sent a lengthier packet to Paul that goes into kind of what a decibel measurement is, but essentially it's measuring sound pressure. And when you measure sound pressure from a point source, it doesn't really matter what height it is. It's not going to be any more amplified if it's higher off the ground or on the ground. It's just creating a source of pressure, which then dissipates the further you get away. So I think the only impact may be that because the skids are 5 feet off the ground, that sound pressure, if the inverters were on the ground, that embankment may buffer the sound more, but being 5 feet off the ground, that embankment may not have as great of an effect.
But do the skids the skid itself serve as, in any way, as an amplifier, as opposed to being on the ground?
I wouldn't think so, because it's so basically, when you typically see a ground-mounted array and you have the inverters on a concrete pad, this is that pad raised 5 feet, so still a flat, as if it was on the ground, no different.
Is there any type of, we have an ongoing issue with a solar farm that that is emitting sound. Is there any type of baffling that can be placed on that skid around the inverter that, in your experience, that you've used?
Not that I've used or seen. Because these inverters do not produce significant amounts of noise, it's not an issue that I typically see come up or something that we need to address. So I don't know what that would be or what that would look like. To be honest,
I know that they use baffling for HVAC systems in commercial buildings. I again didn't know if there's anything that's
not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay, thank you.
Just regarding the noise, you provided the diagram here?
I drew the map. The
Okay.
data is from a white paper that was.
Right. Just to ask, and I know folks out in the audience here cannot see this, but the outer ring, what distance is that? If this was color-coded, it didn't appear on the black and white to tell what distance that was to what's shown as the outer.
The outer ring is 500 meters.
The outer ring is 500 meters?
Yes.
Okay. So we've got some considerable distance for its reaching.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, Frank?
My last question really comes down to home value for the abutters. Could you give us an example of, once a project this is built in Carver or Route 44 Taunton, what happens to the property values to the abutters?
So I'm not aware of any data indicating that homes located near or adjacent to solar projects have measurably lower home values. I'd be happy to evaluate that data if anybody has it. I think the main issue that folks are concerned about is visual issues, and I think that that because there's no real safety or noise issues associated with being near a solar project, I think the main issue to address is visual. And if the visual issues are addressed, I would assume that folks would not be concerned about impacts to property values. And as Stacy said, we would be, we are more than happy to work with the planning board to address those visual concerns.
One question, I'm not sure it's a question for you folks. The existing solar fields that are there now, does anyone on the board know how long those have been in place or when those were installed? It's not something that came up during my time on the board, so just to understand how long those have been in place. Obviously, there's some proximity to the existing neighbors with those solar fields, so.
I believe it's 2014 or 2015 that those were installed. We don't actually own those solar.
Yeah, no, right, as I mentioned, I'm not sure. No, not Clap Street. No, not, Fairleigh. What would be off of, I guess, Fairleigh
Fairleigh,
Road, near
yep.
Fairleigh Road, if anyone knows when those were installed. Michael?
I think it's either 3 or 4 years, I'm not sure.
Okay.
When we were looking at the plans, they included one of the plans from that, and I think it was 2015 was the date of it, of the plan anyway, so.
Warren?
Yeah. Can you confirm the setbacks you're using for this site?
We're using 75 feet for the front yard, and 50 feet for the side
What are you
yards.
considering the front yard? Just that area?
This and the other portion where there's frontage along the road. And we did evaluate that with regard to the zoning definitions as well, because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't 75 feet around the perimeter.
And you're using 50 feet for the rest of it?
Yes.
That's
But then you're-
that's consistent with the R80 zoning on
I know,
for the
I know.
bylaw. Okay.
But now, when we talked about screening, you were suggesting that the abutters pick up the screening, as opposed to putting screening where you're now 50 feet back and maybe why
So,
couldn't you put it
sure.
on your property?
Yep. And just to clarify, we weren't suggesting that the abutters be responsible for the screening on their own property. But just that there may be interest in planting on their property because it may be a more effective buffer, but that obviously needs the applicable abutters input. So the area of screening, I guess, going along the Bay Road side first. The property line is very close to the existing bogs, and so there's not space to plant between the bog edge and the property line. On the westerly edge, there is a little bit more space before we leave our property along here. Basically on the property side of the bypass canal, on the Cranberry Bog side of the bypass canal that's there. And there's also a small wedge where our property widens out where some screening may be able to be planted. So there's about a 20-foot width available between the access road and the existing bogs.
So given your limitations on what you can provide, would there be something wrong with asking you to move back where you put in the panels, to do some accommodation towards screening?
Well, I think the difficulty with that is that would require work within the cranberry bogs.
No, I'm just saying, you've got cranberry bogs, they're there. And instead of having your panels go to the extent of the cranberry bogs, pulling them back so that you have the additional 25 feet, and you're accommodating some screening by lack of where you put your
Yep.
panels.
So that would require plantings in the cranberry, screening plantings within the bogs themselves.
I'm not asking for
Just saying.
screening.
Yeah, just essentially making the project smaller to allow for 75 feet of existing cranberry bog rather than 50 feet of existing.
Without screening, without vegetative
Not
planting.
additional, if you can't screen, you can't screen.
Oh, and just pull it back further.
I'm just suggesting that as a possibility. I don't know how that impacts the neighbors and what they're looking at, but asking them to take on that responsibility seems a little strange to me, unless they elected to do that. But certainly that's a step you can do to mitigate that situation if you can't provide screening otherwise.
Right, and we are significantly set back from Bay Road as well, so we're 50 feet from our property line, but we're much farther from Bay Road itself already. So I'm not sure if an additional 25 feet, would make a significant visual difference without screening proposed, without vegetation proposed.
But you could put fencing along that line if needed?
Between residential zoning.
Fencing along that line if needed?
Yeah, we're currently not proposing a perimeter fence for a couple reasons. One, understand, a lot of people like to walk along the bogs.
75-foot
And
buffer.
also it just provides easier operational access from a farming perspective. So
It's not fronted.
we could put in a perimeter fence in the, essentially the property line goes up to the bank of on the east side there. It goes to the bank of the Cranberry Bog, so we could put a fence there. But our preference would be not to do that. And from our understanding, it seems like that might be the preference of the neighbors, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting one with the other, I just want to
Yep.
air some alternatives and hear from the butters to get their sense of what they like.
And with panels 10 to 12 feet high, it would need to be a very high fence to serve any noticeable purpose in that
Right.
sense.
Right, it would be it would be to prevent access to the site. It wouldn't be a visual buffer at that point.
And, right, and that was one of the reasons that we had kind of eliminated a fence and a berm. There's not sufficient room for a berm to kind of berm up and then put a fence on top or plantings on top. So those were the issues the challenges we faced with fencing and berms.
But it may be on there, I can't see, but what is the distance along Bay Road between the panels and your property line?
So from Bay Road to our panels,
No, from your property line to the panels.
50 feet.
Okay.
Generally, that's the closest it gets. And Paul had pointed out there are a couple actual corners where we encroach a bit into the 50-foot. That wasn't the intent, so we'll clip the panels back.
The design standards talk about lighting as well. Is there any lighting proposed for this site, for this work?
At the, some safety lighting at the inverter pad would be the only lighting that we would have.
Okay. And that's far enough from any residents to have any effect? I can't tell from that.
Yes,
How far
yeah,
is
it
that
would.
from-
I think 300 meters from the nearest residence.
And is that focus lighting?
Yes, downward yes, in compliance with the existing bylaw restrictions.
Then there's a requirement for the cost of removal of this project if it were to fail. I think I saw something with some numbers. It's what, you had 380,000?
Correct.
What's the basis and how'd you calculate that?
We provided a letter with the basis for that. It's a combination of estimates of field time for a crew to dismantle the racking and panels, as well as trucking to remove the equipment from the site and recycle it. And those are inflated, those costs are based on today's costs and then inflated 20 years into the future.
Are there any hazardous materials within these panels?
No.
And does that provide for an inflator, something to inflate as a,
Yes, yeah, we inflated the cost, I believe it was at 2.5% for 20 years.
Yeah, it was listed as 2.5% inflation rate. 320,000 was the number
320, that's right, yeah.
proposed.
Okay.
and then I'm just curious, you mentioned that there's going to be arrangement for payment in lieu of taxes. Is that something that's going to affect this entire parcel, and how long does that run for, and when does that start?
That does affect the entire parcel, and that was also something that was approved at the town meeting last week. And that is for both real and personal property taxes. So that's the total amount of taxes that will be paid for the parcel for the next 20 years on an annual basis.
And after that?
After that, it's something that will need to be renegotiated with the town.
And then I'm assuming most of this will be taken up with conservation, but there is a requirement, I guess, this is in a floodplain zone. Does the provision for the zero impact, 0 inches, is this, it's an AE zone?
It's an A zone,
And
100-year
is there
flood
provision
elevation.
so that the water surface elevation with a 100-year flood won't be more than 0 inches?
Yes, and we did include that information in the packet. We undertook an evaluation of what the project may impact, and we did it very conservatively. So since there's not an elevation determined for the flood, we said, okay, well, let's assume it floods to a 5-foot depth from ground surface. And we took all of the piles and piers that are proposed, and we took a fairly conservative size on them, not the smallest, but the largest that they could possibly be for all of them across the board, and found that at most, the flood may increase 0.001 inches, which is de minimis. And then furthermore, on this property, these bogs here had been excavated fairly recently out of uplands, and so they themselves provided additional flood storage compensation, so there will be no impact to the floodplain.
Now, just the last question. I'm really not familiar with how these operate. Is there some electricity that's being generated that somebody could inadvertently or someone could hurt themselves? Is this inverter surrounded by fencing? Does it need to be fenced in?
Yes, the inverters and the battery storage are surrounded by security fencing.
Is that the only place that would generate electricity for someone to be, that would injure somebody if they got near it?
Yep,
Or
I'll
touched
let
it?
Adam address.
So the solar panels themselves generate electricity. At that point, it's lower voltage electricity, and the wiring for the solar panels will be at 10 feet above ground. And before it goes any lower than that, it will enter rigid conduit and go down the racking into a trench in the bog and then into a trench in the dike roads. So the National Electric Code requires that any wiring not be cannot be easily accessible to untrained persons. And so by raising any accessible wiring to 10 feet and then any wiring below that level is not accessible because it's either in conduit or surrounded by the security fence at the inverter, we meet the requirements of the electric code for safety.
And then what happens relative to windstorms, snowstorms with these panels? They're coming down, are they serviced? Can that create damage or exposure to some people?
The panels actually have very robust wind loading requirements that they need to meet. So during, they're meant to withstand winds of 150 miles an hour. And so at that point, the panels themselves will not be breaking, they will not be pulled out of the ground. And so, if a panel does break for some reason, a tree falls on it or something like that, then, it's part of our routine maintenance to get out to the site as soon as we can, replace it, and we have very sizable insurance in place, which is a requirement of our financiers when we build these projects, so that any disruptions like that or any significant damage done to the project is covered by insurance, and it's in our best interest to remediate the issue as soon as we can, because if the panels aren't there, they're not generating income.
What about snow accumulations? Are they just left to dissipate on their own, or is anything proactively done?
With fixed tilt projects that, like you see throughout the state, if there's some heavy snowfall that is not automatically or kind of just by default shedding off the panels, which can happen sometimes just if the sun hasn't come out for a few days, then some folks will actually go out there and rake the snow off the panels. With these single-axis tracking projects, we don't expect to need to do that because they tilt to 45 degrees on either side at least once a day, and so that tends to shed the snow. But if for some reason there was significant snow accumulation on them, snow or ice accumulation on them that wasn't being shed automatically, we would go out and rake off the snow.
What about the field itself for surfacing them? Is there any method to clear the path so you can get access to them?
We would be, likely plowing the bog access roads if necessary. Within the bog itself, I don't expect we'd need to do or want to do any clearing. I think we could do the work that we needed to do out on the snow on the bog.
Okay. Thank you.
Quick question, I know that you don't own the adjacent, the solar field, but you're a 2 megawatt proposal, I believe?
Yes.
Just for purposes of particularly people in the area. Do you know what size the adjacent field is?
That's a little over 3 megawatts DC, and it's also.
This is 8?
This is 8.9.
Okay. So this is? Triple the size?
2.5, yeah.
I'm sorry, you said the front yard is just limited to the one little corner that approaches Bay Road? Does the property front any other streets?
No, it does not. There is that one other frontage on Bay Road, but those are the only 2 frontages I'm aware of for the property.
Any other questions for the moment from the board, Julie?
I've got one, Joe. Everybody else did a great job. With permission to move forward, what would be your schedule for build-out for this?
Ideally, we could start construction after the harvest this fall. And if conditions permit, we could build the project over the winter months or late fall, early winter, and commission the project in the early winter of 2020. Or sorry, I mean late winter, early spring of 2020.
Okay, I know there were questions, I assume there were questions from the audience. What I'd ask you to do is 2 things. It's not so much for our benefit because we can hear you, but given the fact that this is being taped and my sense is there are people at home that will want to be watching this, I'd ask you to come to the podium so that the cameras and audio can pick you up and identify yourself and with an address, and then ask whatever question you have. I'll open up. Yes, ma'am.
Should I come up here?
Please.
Get you my okay. Hi there, my name is Linda Sweeney from 6 Stone Run Drive in Norton. So I had a couple of questions about clarification. On your map here that you're showing, and I'm assuming this line going across here is the Easton Norton line, right here?
Yeah.
Yes.
So is this 186 acres that you're showing the panels on?
The total parcel is 186
Including the
acres.
eastern side, right?
Um,
Or just the Norton side? That's what I was confused.
I believe that's just the Norton side, because.
The Norton
including-
side is 186 acres?
I believe that's correct. I can double check.
I think right, when we look at this against the property appraiser's data, we would only be looking at the Norton side.
Right, but when they were talking about the whole area, there's cranberry bogs that go into Easton, so I'm confused. I didn't know if 186 acres means Norton and Easton, or just our Norton side.
So I believe, and I'll confirm, that the 183 acres is for the Norton parcel, and the solar panels are proposed on about 60 acres of cranberry bogs.
Okay, maybe it's just a drawing, because it looks like it covers way more than 60 acres.
That's not the entire bog complex.
Only the Norton part, you said 60 acres on the Norton part, right?
The bog complex extends further to the south than what you see on the map there.
Oh, okay, so just the main part up there. Okay, that was my question. So then, my second part of this was, what about studies to put it more upland and not in the cranberry bogs? You must have done all that already.
So there's, the project is a dual-use agricultural solar project, and so it needs to be located on active farmland.
Okay.
And
But the Massachusetts regulations, as I understand them, anybody can correct me, is that's like the last resort. You should do uplands before, other areas before.
the SMART program actually incentivizes using active farmland. So we actually get,
But not wetlands, or does it incentivize using wetlands? I'm talking about wetlands protection.
so the SMART program is agnostic to that issue, as long as you adhere to the Department of Environmental Protection and the Wetland Protection Act. And the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, which has jurisdiction over the Wetlands Protection Act, in early October released policy guidance stating that if you are a dual-use solar project adhering to the requirements of the SMART program dual-use program, then they do not deem a solar project installed on wetland cranberry bogs to be an impact to the wetlands for the purposes of the Wetlands Protection Act.
That just sounded like a lot of
It was a lot of words.
roundabout way.
Well,
But when I read the Wetlands Protection Act, I don't think that the DEP wipes it out just because you're going to harvest cranberries at the same time you're going to create solar energy, does it?
No, so just to clarify, and I'm sure this will be discussed at the Conservation Commission meeting next week as well. So yes, you need to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts in wetlands per the Wetlands Protection Act, and DEP issued a guidance document that explained kind of the permitting path for these dual-use projects since in southeastern.
But are you still under the guidelines of the Wetlands Protection Act, the Massachusetts and Norton?
Yes, yeah, and that.
Which
we
does
filed
ask
it-
the question, did you try to find another spot for your panels that would not be over wetlands?
So in terms of the alternatives that are required for avoid, minimize, mitigate, this is the parcel that was available to us in the type of project that was available. We did submit a notice of intent to the Conservation Commission, and that meeting is the 28th, which I believe is this
Right.
coming Monday.
So then when you speak about dual use, you mean you're going to harvest the cranberry still, and you're going to create solar energy. Are we getting some benefit of the solar energy, our town?
There has been negotiated a $200,000 per year payment in lieu of taxes agreement. So this will generate $200,000 annually over the course of the 20 years. Is $4 million.
So what would 183 acres at a commercial rate be, the taxes per year?
Well, it's not a commercial rate. It's currently.
It's agriculture, but
With an
I'm guessing, I don't know what cranberries produce, but I'm pretty sure the solar is going to create a lot more income than the cranberries. At which point, me, as a citizen in this town, would say that's a commercial property now,
Well-
including 10 years of back taxes at the commercial rate.
Again, it's, and I haven't checked with the assessors, I'm assuming it's under an agricultural exemption. And the taxes, I don't know, but my assumption is they're fairly minimum currently, because it does
Because it's agriculture,
because it's agricultural. And under the guidelines, as I understand them,
very minimal
they can,
taxes.
they can still maintain an agricultural exemption.
When they're making more income from a commercial endeavor?
And that's why they have to negotiate a payment in lieu of taxes. We haven't been involved in terms of that negotiations. That was,
When will that be presented to the townspeople?
it already
That
Because-
was at the voters' meeting this past.
The difference, because once agricultural land changes from agricultural to
You
residential,
need to understand that under the guidelines, it's not changing from agricultural. It's still agricultural. It's now taking advantage of this program, and because there are solar panels, in lieu of taxes, they pay a payment in lieu of taxes. which is
Yeah.
where the $200,000 comes from.
so 4 million
It's not
over the
losing
20
its
years.
agricultural exemption, as I understand it, maintains its agricultural exemption, and it now, in terms of the personal property tax, pays the payment in lieu of taxes. I could stand to be corrected, but
Maybe the assessor, that would be a good question to ask the assessor, how that happens when land goes from agricultural to commercial.
here again, it
It
hasn't.
still has, it hasn't yet, no, I know.
And again, once the project is built, it still, as I understand it, will maintain its agricultural exemption.
Because it's been approved by the town, and they said, okay.
Right. Well, it still qualifies for the Chapter 61A agricultural exemption, as it has always. What is being handled different, or what the difference is now, is the solar panels would pay a personal property tax, and instead of paying a personal property tax under solar, under the solar program in the state, they pay a payment in lieu of taxes, thus the $200,000 per year.
So we're just going to get like a payment, not any extra energy or anything? No. And then I just wondered, with regard to the property values in Carver, I know you said you didn't have any data that showed any depreciation. Where did that information come from? Like, there are assessors there, said, you know, this house on this street next to that has sold for more in the last 4 years, or, you know, where'd you get that information?
So if you search for information regarding there not being, or if you search for information regarding lower property values associated with being near solar projects, that is what is not available. That's what I was trying to.
Oh, I thought you didn't do the one in Carver.
So there's not, I'm not aware, what I said was I'm not aware of any data that links homes being near solar projects.
So it sounds like no research has been done then, right? If I Google it, I won't find it, right?
That's my understanding.
You guys didn't do any research into that?
No.
And then my last question, I'm sorry. I am concerned that there's no data about the viability of the cranberry bog still growing cranberries with these panels and everything.
Sure. So the Department of Agriculture, along with the Department of Energy Resources, created the guidelines for the dual-use program based off of what they observed at a pilot project, dual-use pilot project at UMass Amherst.
Okay.
And the UMass Amherst project tested something like 8 different crops. Cranberries were not one of those crops. But what they observed from this variety of crops was that when sunlight was not reduced below 50% of what would have otherwise reached the ground, the crops maintained at least 50% as much productivity as they would have otherwise. And actually, in some years, particularly in hot summers, like the summer of 2016, the crops underneath the solar panels outproduced the crops that were not covered with solar panels. And so I think there's obviously quite a bit to learn here because it's such a new thing.
Newer, right.
We don't know for sure what the production will be, but we're confident based on the guidelines provided by the Department of Agriculture, along with the observations that we've made. Stacy brought up a solar project, just a normal solar project, not this dual-use design on a cranberry bog in Carver, where there's no attempt made whatsoever to maintain the
harvest,
ongoing.
yeah.
Right, and that's where we mentioned that the vines have actually come back to a point now where they are very healthy. And we'd be happy to share pictures of that with the planning board and interested folks if you'd like to look at that further.
And your company itself, exactly, in Massachusetts, have you installed solar farms anywhere else?
Yes, yes.
What towns would that be?
A number of different towns. We've been very active in Massachusetts since we were founded in Boston in 2008. We have towns in northern central Massachusetts, a lot of towns actually in Middleborough. We were the exclusive provider of solar services to Middleborough Gas and Electric for a number of years. And so we do have existing projects in Massachusetts, and because of that, we have existing on-the-ground operations and maintenance staff that is staffed.
You've been
out of
around a
Boston.
while.
Yes, yes. Yeah, the company's it's been in Massachusetts for over 10 years.
Okay, that's all I have. Thanks so much for the time.
Yes, well, I'll recognize the person in the back only because I saw him raise his hand first. Well, okay, doesn't matter.
My name is Joe Cogliano. I am the director of Blueview Nurseries and trustee of the real estate trust that owns the land under it, as well as a resident at 202 Bay Road. I have some questions. I actually wasn't aware that there was a town meeting that approved these types of projects now as of right. Is that what I heard? Is that correct? These large-scale projects are now as of right in the
Yes.
town?
That was approved.
Is that correct?
Zoning change.
Yeah. When was that town meeting?
Last Monday.
Last Monday.
Just to clarify, it's the use is as of right, as opposed to before it was with a special permit.
So there's no special permit now?
The special permit for the actual use is no longer required under the amendment.
in this case, there would still need a special permit because of where it's located and some other things.
Because of the wetlands and such? Okay. So what I'd like to do is ask some questions to make sure that I understand this, because this is a recent thing that I'm finding out about all this. We've spoken about a bunch of different things here. In terms of total capacity, you're talking about the Norton Farm being about 186 acres. Are you involved with any development for the eastern portion? Is there going to be more development in Easton, or is this it? Is this a phase one, or is this it?
This is the only project, this is it,
So nothing further is planned?
correct.
Okay. In terms of the inverter, what is the distance from the inverter to the property line? So let's see, is your inverter over here somewhere? Is this your inverter here?
Just come in with a scale.
Where is your inverter?
This is the inverter.
Okay, so what is the distance from the inverter to my property line?
So, your property line, right? Is this you?
This is my property line here, yeah. Actually, no, you know what, there's another, I don't know if you're showing that, because we bought some additional land, so it actually comes out here. It's not being shown on this. I don't think this is accurate.
So we prepared it.
This is not accurate. We just purchased five plus acres from Fairland Farms last year, and it comes out like this. So our land comes up here, I believe.
I can
This is
coordinate.
parcel C and D, which we bought a number of years ago, and then there was an E, F, and G, which we bought here even last year. So this doesn't look accurate to me.
Okay, we did have a boundary plan prepared by our professional land surveyor, but perhaps we can catch up after and you can provide information, because that's nothing that we had come across in our survey.
Well, let me ask you this question, because this is relevant. So my question to you is, when we find out what the distance is from that inverter to the property line, I would like to know what the level of radiation is, electromagnetic field at that point. Okay?
So I circulated a study that was commissioned by the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center just earlier this afternoon to Paul, and so EMF or electromagnetic fields
Yep.
are something that our household appliances emit. It's a part of everyday life, and what this study demonstrated, which is consistent with other research, is that when you're within 1 meter of the inverter, the electromagnetic field does not exceed any safety thresholds.
Well, let me put it this way. Is it 0.5 or less at the property line? Because that's really what I want to know.
Yes,
You're saying it is.
yes.
And we don't know exactly where the property line is right now based on this.
I'm saying when you're more than a meter away from the inverter, it's less than 0.5.
When you're more than a meter, what does that mean? More than a meter could be 200 feet. You're saying,
At 1 meter from
you're
the
saying
inverter.
at 1 meter, it's at 0.5. Okay. You spoke about no hazardous material in the arrays. Are they made out of silicon?
Correct.
Fencing, we spoke about safety issue. I assume the fire department has looked at this? Okay.
They have looked at it. They're
They have looked at it,
reviewing
fine.
it, yes.
In terms of, I think the main issues here are devaluation of property, which this definitely is going to do. And we know that. There are no studies. That's the reason why you can claim what you're claiming, because nobody's really looked at that. You just got to ask yourself, would you buy a house living next to this?
No.
Probably not.
All right,
That's it. So
Mr.
that-
Cogliano, please, if you, rather than address the audience.
That was only because I was pointed this way, trying to talk to them and you. But that's fine, no problem. In any event, I do think that's one of the issues here. So the question becomes on the screening. Again, is this the extent of it here? Is this the extent of the arrays? Or did it
No,
go further down?
this, when I was measuring, or when I was going to measure, I flipped to another plan. So this is the extent of the arrays.
Okay, so it's essentially the whole thing. So,
Well, just to clarify, the property does continue south with more cranberry bogs that are not shown on that.
Right, I couldn't see because of this podium. Could you tell me where the screening was that you were talking about earlier? Where you were planning the screening?
If I may.
Certainly.
So we were discussing with the board that we were seeking input on the screening. The areas we had focused on were along the western edge, and then we were asked to look along Bay Road as well, along this portion of the property.
Okay, you definitely need screening here if you're going to enclose this project from public view. You're also going to need screening here because my sales yard is here, and we can see directly into the bog, so that would have to be screened. This point is about 20 foot high, so that's not really necessary. It's 20 foot above the bogs.
Right.
But then the property slopes down from here, so as you go further this way, there's also going to be a need for more screening in here. Maybe that's something, if this gets approved, which we don't know yet, that's something we can talk about further. But I just want you to be aware that there's some significant screening that's necessary from the standpoint of enclosing the project. Now, it sounds like there's a $4 million payment over 20 years in lieu of taxes. These projects only work because of taxpayer subsidy. That's the only reason. And then there's the consumer fee that's paid on electric bills. I'm a little bit late to the party here, it seems like, but has there been any thought about linkage payments or getting a piece of the revenue stream from this project to improve Bay Road, like sidewalks or maybe a sewer from Easton, connecting a sewer from Easton or something? I mean, as I said, I don't know how far down the path we are here, but that's something that I would have looked at. One of the questions I have is why is your firm responsible for the cranberry bogs instead of Fred Bottomley?
Our firm is purchasing the property, and we will be hiring the same person that currently manages the bogs for Fred Bottomley to continue managing the bogs.
The problem I have with that is I don't think that's what the spirit of this regulation was put forth for. This was in part to help cranberry bog growers. It's not to help a solar project get started, and they just keep the cranberries on the side with no performance requirements so that they can get the deal done. This is not right. Now, I believe in private property rights, which is why this is tough for me, because on the one hand, I really think property owners should be able to do within reason what they want with their property. On the other hand, property owners shouldn't be able to affect the property around them in this way. So that's a problem. Were you involved with the Dartmouth project that Fred Bottomley was doing? Has that been approved? The Dartmouth project, 115 acres? Nick's son was also going to buy that property. Were you involved with that?
115 acres doesn't sound right. We were working on a 40-acre project there, which is still in process.
Okay. Is the town for that project?
There's a hearing next week with the Agricultural Commission and the Planning Board to discuss it further.
Somebody, one of you gentlemen or ladies had mentioned the end-of-life situation with this, and apparently there's about $380,000 set aside for that?
It's 320,000.
320,000, okay. What happens if you go bankrupt? Which will happen if these subsidies stop? Which will happen if the stock market crashes and we have a financial collapse, which may or may not happen? But there's a good chance, like SunEdison, they went bankrupt, didn't they? SunEdison?
Edison did go bankrupt.
Right. I'm just curious, what happens when you go bankrupt? If you go bankrupt, I'll give you that, 'cause you look like a nice guy.
I would say I won't concede that the company will go bankrupt. We, unlike SunEdison, like to properly manage our finances and our operations.
Good.
The decommissioning bond is in place for just that reason, however, and that decommissioning bond is a surety held by the bank that issues it. And so in the event that the company goes bankrupt, that money will be there for the decommissioning of the project, which is, like I said, the whole reason for requiring it.
So there's a bond in place to cover that. All right, so, I guess the question is, should a regulation that was set up to benefit farmers be used to create a power plant with no intention of maintaining the bogs in the manner that they're supposed to maintain, as an ongoing business? I guess that's really what it comes down to. My understanding was that Fred had set that up as an organic farm, which paid a higher rate per barrel than typical cranberries, and that's what he was focused on. I wish him well. I don't have anything against Fred, and I wish him well. But I'm just a little bit concerned. This project is 3 times bigger than the other one. I didn't oppose the first project. It was over in the corner. It was over in the corner of his property, kind of set back nice there. Again, I believe that private property owners should be able to pretty much do what they want. This is something different. This is tremendous, this project. You're talking about almost 9 megawatts of energy. I'm glad if this were to go through, you're fencing in, the battery and the inverter. What is the probability of the battery exploding?
Very low.
Okay. I'll let you go with that one.
If you wanted to respond.
I would just like to respond to the assertions that you made that we have no intention of continuing to manage the bogs in the way that they're intended to be managed. I take significant issue with that statement. That is not at all our intention. We will be maintaining the cranberry bogs as an organic cultivation, and we will be maximizing the amount of productivity that we can get out of the bogs while adhering to best management practices.
But you'll also admit that that's not your business. Your business is creating solar projects, solar plants, correct?
Not anymore.
I know you're from Wisconsin, and I'll give you a little break for that, but it's not the same thing.
Well, truly, we're in the business now of managing farms and producing solar electricity on the same. It's a dual-use project. You can't slice that any other way. It's 2 uses.
Have you done any impact studies on this site for sound, water? This is a well water protection zone too, I think, which has some special significance or heat island effect from this stuff.
I'm not aware of heat island issues. I'm not sure what that would be. We did produce the sound study, or the sound study that was commissioned by the inverter manufacturer, and put that on the map. The well water issues, we don't. As I said, we will maintain the organic cultivation of the bogs. The impacts that we will have to the bogs is the driving of the steel piers, which is not toxic. There are no toxic materials that we'll be putting on the bogs, so we do not expect there to be any negative impacts to water quality.
Do you think there should be some kind of a penalty if it turns out that the maintenance of the bogs becomes kind of a sham type thing? Should there be some kind of a penalty in that situation if that would occur? Now, I assume that that's not what you intend, but should we be thinking about something like that? Because this is all new to Massachusetts. Solar energy is the future. There's no question about that. But you would admit that the biggest problem with it is battery storage technology, and it's not there. If this could stand on its own 2 feet without subsidy, that would be one thing. But it can't, which means we're all paying for this, and we're all paying for this experiment. Some of these people live in that neighborhood. We've been there since 1975. So, are you going to sign a guarantee saying you're going to take care of everything if there's any problems with, people's health or, anything that comes from this type of thing? Most of what science does today is it'll say, we don't think there's a problem, but they don't necessarily have the technology to know if there's a problem. We don't know what we don't know with these issues. Just like cell phone technology, they're starting to see there's a connection with cell phone technology and tumors and such.
Well, I would respond to that by saying, solar panel technology is certainly much more prevalent than it was 20 years ago, but there are a lot of existing solar projects at this point that are more than 15, 20 years old. and we haven't been seeing any health impacts associated with those. And when you look at the study that I circulated earlier, there is no electromagnetic frequencies emitted by the solar panels themselves. It's only from the inverter, and at that point, it's very low. So aside from that, I don't know where any potential health impacts would come from. And so I personally am standing behind the fact that there will not be any health impacts arising from this project. And I don't, aside from presenting the data and the research that we have to date, I don't know what, what else we can do on that.
Well, unfortunately, I did not have a lot of time to study this. I'm trying to learn more about it. But I just think that this should be proceeded slowly. This is a big deal. I sense there's a desire in this town to move towards green, which I'm in the business of green. We sell green. And there's a big push for all this solar stuff, but I'm not sure if it's quite there yet. I don't think the technology is quite there yet. And then, of course, also the town is interested always in improving revenue, so I understand that also. I just think we have to proceed a little bit slowly with this and think about what we're really doing here. I don't know if anybody else in the neighborhood has anything to say, but...
Can I ask,
Yes.
can I ask the person, I'm sorry, I didn't get your last name. It's
Cogliano, C-O-G-L-I-A-N-O.
Thank you. Could I ask you, within the area that's affecting you, do you have any particular preference as to what type of screening you would like to see?
Actually, I would leave that to my brother Tony. He's the horticulturalist. I'm the financial, legal, real estate guy. But I would expect there'd be things like pine, spruce, and hemlock.
But you'd rather see vegetation than fencing?
Excuse me?
Vegetation rather than fencing?
Yeah, because, I mean, fencing in and of itself can be an eyesore. It depends on how you do it. And there's also a sound barrier created by living trees, which is helpful.
I'll just ask a question.
And by the way, I'm not going to require you to buy the trees from me either. Even for local businesses, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, well.
That doesn't mean it's going to be approved yet. I see some faces that we don't know yet.
I was just wondering, because the existing vegetation along your property line, there are deciduous trees there. And we have this situation along other property lines as well, where, to completely screen the project for the duration of the year, we'd need to essentially rip out those deciduous trees and put in evergreens. And is that something that that you would prefer to see? Or, I mean, would you prefer that over the existing vegetation, or maybe the addition of a row of evergreens where we could fit it?
You'd have to walk the site. And like, for example, your concern regarding sandy soil, all you have to do is create an environment for the item that's not sandy soil. So you dig a hole wider and deeper than the ball and you use loam. It doesn't really matter if there's sandy soil, if you've got the right environment around the tree, or shrub. So, and something would definitely have to be done out front, because that's just wide open. But again, and I'm not sure what else to say. I didn't have a lot of time to study this, so I don't know everything about it. But I am concerned about the electromagnetic field, because my understanding was you need like 150 feet to get down to 0.5 from an inverter or transformer. So I'm not sure. Maybe you could provide some information.
I'm happy to send you the study that I circulated earlier.
Okay. And, beyond that, I do think that our part of the world is a little bit far away from the center of Norton, but that doesn't mean we're not part of the town. And, I know I don't know if some of you people even maybe not go out that way. We're almost on the East End line. But I think this takes some thought. This isn't a slam dunk. This isn't just about $4 million. This is about 20 years minimum, and the impact it's going to have on people in that area. Now, I'm hearing that there are some issues regarding other sites that have been done in town that there have been some problems with. And must be reasons that other towns are declining these types of projects. I would research that if I didn't have time before this meeting. But please give it some thought. I don't want to do anything to hurt Fred Bottomley as a fellow farmer. Maybe there's another way to go about this, skin this cat, maybe a slightly reduced project, I'm not sure. But please give it some thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Chuck Gallagher. I live at 201 Bay Road. I was at the town meeting the other night, and like the other gentleman just said, we didn't even know about this till about a week and a half ago. Granted, the town did what they were obligated to do by posting it in places that nobody ever goes to, but that's what was done. Nobody knocked on my door from this company. Nobody knocked on my door from the Boggs, which is right across the street. I can literally throw a baseball there. Nobody came over and said anything to anybody that I know of that this is going to affect, which I learned at the town meeting. Now that's been voted in, will also include the other bogs. So it's not going to be just the one on Bay Road, is what I was told. The 4 other bogs can now get solar panels in as well, without having to go to a special meeting. That's one of the concerns that I have. Another concern that I have is that, like this gentleman just said, at the last meeting, they had to rush into it. They have to hurry and get this done so they can get it through the state and get what they need to get. This is way too important to rush into. I'm in favor of solar panels. I like the idea of it. And I like the idea of the town going green. But the way that this project's been brought forward to the residents, which from our opinion is behind back doors.
Having spent 45 years in some fashion in public service, it's an irritant to me when people say that somehow these things are backdoor. Again, 45 years doesn't make me smart, but I have to be pretty dumb not to realize that I can't scratch my butt as a public entity without it being posted, 48 hours minimum, in this case televised, so that, I know there's a lot of social media out there that somehow this has been snuck behind people's back. I can't help it if, you can sign up for emails from the town that, be it a town meeting, be it a planning board agenda, automatically gets sent to you. I know that there is a temptation to use that as a rationale for being opposed to whatever it is that may be being proposed. But again, you just hit a nerve with me.
I apologize.
No. I just want you to be aware that not only have we done everything that we're legally required to do, everyone within 300 feet received a certified mailing of this, which I assume you did.
Yes.
Within 300 feet of this project, and we can. Before the night's over, come up and give me your name, and I'll see if you're on the list. But nevertheless, over 150 certified mailings went out on this. But again,
I appreciate that, because that's how we found out about this. I'm referring, I guess, mainly to the town meeting, not to you folks. You folks informed us like you were supposed to. But, I work 60 hours a week. I got 2 kids. We don't have time to do what we'd like to do in towns as much as we'd like to. So, and what I think is that the folks that are putting the proposal together for the town, they should have been the ones that are mandated. And this is just, we should have been notified about this project anyhow, regardless. My understanding, the 60 acres that they put in at the town meeting to build them, what I was told at the town meeting was that they can expand that now. Now that it's gone through the town meeting, that can be expanded to the rest of the property. So today we're talking about 60 acres. Next month, they could be coming in here asking for the rest of it to be done, as well as the other bogs. So that's concerning to us. There's been no talk at all about health, about how this affects people's health. My wife and I have been studying up on it in the last 8 days that we've been aware of it, and we've seen that there's studies that say that this doesn't harm anybody, but we've also seen studies that say that it causes leukemia with children. So to jump into something quick with this is just way too dangerous. You got about 200 families in here that are affected by it directly, abutting all these different bogs. And I think it would be wise of the board to postpone things, put it on hold, look more into it, find out more about it. I apologize if you can't get in the schedule that you want, but my kids are more important. That's how I look at it. The other thing that I've learned is that, and I don't know if you've been in touch with Holliston, Dartmouth, Marion, and West Bridgewater, but these 4 communities turned this down. 2 of them, from what I understand, were the planning boards that turned them down. I don't know if anybody's talking to anybody in those communities, but it'd be nice to have some input as to why that maybe was done. maybe they know something we don't know. The property value will go down because I bought my house 3 years ago. If I walked into a house and saw panels in the backyard, I would have turned around and walked out. But I didn't. I saw beautiful cranberry bogs, beautiful woods, beautiful everything, because I grew up in Easton. I'm not that far away. It's a beautiful area. It's a historic road. That's what I saw when I bought a house in Norton, a nice small town that I wanted to raise my kids in. And now we're going to have hundreds of acres, potentially, of solar panels in our backyards. And the quality of life, my understanding is the people on Clap Street that we've talked to, they can hear the humming from the inverter. Again, when they say that they have to have an active bog, does that mean that it would be one little group of blueberries, or the whole bog has to be active, or?
The requirement applies to every square foot of farmland that's being occupied.
Thank you.
I don't mean to cut you short, but I just want to follow up on that. Could you provide us any relevant regulation that, or requirement of the dual program that places an onus on you for production?
Sure. And like I said, there's not a specific
No,
production.
but again, whatever is there as part of the program, I'd be curious to see it.
Also, that's okay. That's okay. My understanding also is that there's been short-term studies done, but there've been no long-term plans done. So the short-term studies that have been done are fine, but we're talking about 20 years from now. So we could find out 15 years from now that what we've been allowing to happen is giving our kids cancer or leukemia. We don't know because it hasn't been done. It's all new. And to put it this house close to a residence, I think is dangerous. 50 to 75 feet from a house? I mean, that's half a football field from your children's bedroom, potentially. And again, I'm for solar panels. I like the idea of them. I think it's a great idea. And then, how often is it tested for radiation and anything else that might be harmful? Is that the end of it? Once it comes in, that's it? Or does it get tested yearly? And if there's any changes, would it get decommissioned? If the energy level goes up from what it started out at, would it get decommissioned, or they just say, don't worry about it? We don't know. I don't know I don't know what would happen. I guess basically it comes down to the panel's going to be as high as 13 feet. That's about as high as these lights. That's pretty high. It's going to be difficult to screen from Bay Road, so it's going to be an eyesore. People driving through town, people going home. The possibility of more mosquitoes is out there. Listening to the investors' noise, what we don't hear now, but noise travels at night. How many times have you sat in your yard and you can hear an owl 100 yards away? We have a rooster about 8 houses down we hear every day. The other thing, if Carver, I'm not too aware of. When I go down Carver, I don't see any houses around the bogs. So I think it's a lot more thickly settled here with residents than it is down in Carver. So I think to compare one to the other is wrong. And then the 4 other communities that said no. There's got to be something going on with it that I'm not aware of, or we're not aware of. I'd like to know, maybe it's something that doesn't affect us at all, why they said no. But we should at least know what the reason was. I just think it's very important. And $200,000 is less than 1% of the budget for the town, if I'm not mistaken, which is, I mean, to you and me, $200,000 make my day. But in the big picture of a town like this, it's really not that much to jeopardize the safety of 200 of the people that live here, 200 houses, not to mention their kids and their grandparents, whoever lives in the house. It's just really has to be really looked at a lot deeper and not rushed through. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Carrie Snyder, 215 Bay Road. A lot of my questions have been answered today, but I do have a couple of follow-ups. I have some written testimony that I'd like to submit. I'm not going to read it, just the highlights. My first question returns back to the noise. Will the inverter be making noise at night, or is that just during the day when the panels are active?
Just during the day when the panels are active.
Okay, and
Sorry, let me qualify that.
Yep.
With the battery storage component, the inverters will be able to remain active into the evening hours as well. But as soon as the battery storage is depleted, the inverters will no longer be active.
And is there any estimate of how long it takes for those to deplete?
I would assume within, it depends, in the summer it will be longer. I think it would be about 4 hours after sundown.
Okay, thank you. And while the panels themselves might not make noise, what about, is there a motor that moves them? They're moving during the day and tracking, so is there noise coming from that as well?
There is a motor. It's an electric motor that creates, there is a noise, but it's much less than the noise produced by the inverters. And I don't actually have a number on that, but I could look into that.
That would be great. I would love that to be added to the file. The screening is hugely important. I'm glad that will be that'll be looked at. I assume a landscape detail will be added later once you've been talking to the board. I have a beautiful view of the bog in all 4 seasons right now. So, and I love the idea of keeping the mature trees there. But definitely it needs to be filled in with evergreens, with shrubs, with something, because we can clearly see through it. The scale and scope concerns me. Being 50 feet from the property line of those residences, particularly on the the west side of Bay Road, seems inadequate. So I wonder if there's a way to consolidate that and maybe bring it further away from some of the residences.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Chairman, if I may just clarify, so for the western abutters, we held 50 feet around the entire property as the minimum, but it's far greater. I think it's 300 or 350 feet from those residences. We're not, so there's those westerly abutters, there's a bypass canal, a sand track road, a series of cranberry bogs, and then the cranberry bogs that we're proposing in on that western side. Just
But from the residences, not from the property lines?
from the property line
Okay,
or the
okay.
residences, yeah.
Okay.
Just so that, you're on Bay Road, correct?
I am, I'm on the east side of Bay Road. So I'm right at Cranberry Lane.
So the area I was talking about was just for the western in
Right, yes, yes. And then I guess my last question is for a neighbor who couldn't be here today. There's an access road further south along Bay Road on the other side of Blueview. Are you guys planning to use that at all? It's sort of overgrown now and not used, but
No, we're not.
okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Hi. Ryan Sherman, 222 Bay Road. I have some specific questions about the screening and the property lines. But before I get into that, I'd just like to echo the concerns of my fellow neighbors. I too, I don't think I could be any closer to this project and have certain concerns for the long-term health of my family. I certainly understand there's some short-term studies that show that low EMF doesn't cause health concerns. There's actually some mixed studies, as I heard another neighbor speak of. And long-term studies, because solar energy is so new, there's just not enough to confirm. And in fact, I'm not sure if it's the same document that's been circulated that was put out by the Massachusetts Department of Energy Environmental Protection Agency and Clean Energy Center. But they actually quote in here that long-term exposure to low-level magnetic fields was too uncertain to set guidelines. So I was wondering if there's any consideration from the board to just wait for some long-term studies to come out. I know other communities that were mentioned, Holliston, West Bridgewater, their boards with much smaller projects, about 1.5 and 2 megawatts, decided to proceed with caution and not move forward because of public health and quality of life concerns and wait for more long-term studies. And I would just like to urge this board to take some of that into consideration where maybe some of the evidence shows short-term studies show that it could be safe, but certainly the research just hasn't been around. The body of research isn't there to confirm that long-term. And then I had some concerns regarding, and if you don't mind, I'll use this map. I think early on in the meeting I heard Senator Jim, sorry I don't know your names, but state that there are no residents over here, and in fact my house is actually on this side of Bay Road. I'm the only property on this piece of Bay Road. And so I own a 2-story colonial that sits up on a hill. So I really have some strong concerns about how proper screening would be able to actually be applied. My house is quite tall and I sit up, like I said, on a large embankment, so I'm pretty curious of how, if these are 13 feet up in the air at times, how that can be enclosed. I'll also say too that it's hard to tell on this drawing, but when I looked at the plans on a larger scale and I think a different outline, my property line includes the easement right on the bogs, and it looks like the solar panels actually go right up to that. I think I just heard them take into consideration on the other side of the bogs, I think 300 feet from residents on the west side.
That's right, because we're not proposing solar panels on the western portion of the bogs, and then there's another access road and a bypass canal, and then
Right, which sounds like quite a distance compared to my property, where it actually, in these renderings, goes right up to, I don't even have the 50 feet that was suggested, let alone the 300, and that's a big concern, along with the screening. So it doesn't look like that's been taken into consideration. In fact, it sounds like you didn't even know my property existed. So I question if you've actually been out to even see the land.
No, we do know your house is there. I think that was just a misstatement. But we, like I said, we're more than happy to work with abutters and the planning board to come up with a vegetation plan that works. And so, if it would make sense to meet with you on site and talk about it further, we're more than happy to do that, and also just take direction from the board.
Yeah, and I think all those things need to be done if this is to move forward. I think we're just too early on. There's so many questions that haven't been answered, and clearly even some missteps of where between Blue Hills Nursery and my property lines, even where those exist. So I think more time needs to be taken to even consider this going forward if these plans there's so many holes in them right now.
I think with the Blueview Nurseries, that likely just hasn't been recorded yet, and it didn't show up in the town records or the county records, so that isn't really on us. And with the property line by your house, I think we did have a couple panels that were encroaching on within the 50-foot setback, which was just an error on our part, and we're rectifying that for our next submittal. And in regards to the access easement there for agricultural use, because your property line does go out, it includes the access road there.
Yeah.
And we, I think the question was raised as to whether or not that easement goes away, but in our analysis of it, that because we're continuing the agricultural use of the property, that wouldn't really change the use of that easement either.
But would you say that since it is my property, it would have to be at least 50 feet, and I would love the consideration of the 300 that you did on the other side of the bogs from that property line?
It is, right, we are putting it 50 feet from your line, which goes basically to the very eastern edge of the cranberry bogs. So we're not putting anything within 50 feet of your property line.
Of the easement. All right, so that needs a correction that needs to be made.
Right, yeah.
Is there any consideration by the board or you to give a further buffer zone, as it seems that my property seems to be the closest to the solar panels?
You know, I think at some point for us, the project just doesn't work if it's not a certain size. I think we can be, it's certainly something that we can talk about.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of questions left to be answered, and I would just urge this board to take some time to consider those, the health, the property values, and the screening and placement that, at least in my opinion, hasn't been sufficiently answered here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, this young lady and then you, sir.
Hi, good. Cheryl Bowden, 130 Bay Road.
What was the name
What's
again,
the name,
please?
please?
Cheryl Bowden. I'm not sure where my house is in regards to here. It's 130.
Cheryl, what was your address again?
130 Bay Road.
130, okay.
Yeah. Can you tell me where 130 would be on there?
I'm not sure if it's labeled by address, it's labeled by assessor's map. No, I can't, since you're not a direct abutter, we hadn't put the
Okay.
address.
Well, my house is directly abutting the cranberry bog as well, and I definitely wanted to echo everything that my fellow neighbors had said. But I did have a question for the board. Are you going to bring in maybe real estate agents to have a non-biased professional opinion to evaluate the property values on Bay Road today as it stands with the premium views? Because I will tell you that I outbid 9 other people for my view on my house, and this is going to dramatically impact my property value as well as my neighbors, and then have them come in and reevaluate property values with the view of the solar panels in there and talk about maybe compensation to the neighbors.
I can only tell you that that concept was discussed and implemented as part, and I'll have to check, I picked up a copy today. That concept was discussed in another solar project, that there was some money that was to be set aside, and I frankly have to follow up to see what was done about that. There was a discussion about having money set aside that would protect property values. Again, I'm not making any types of commitments. I'm simply saying that was the discussion. There was a mechanism that was discussed. I'd have to go back and look at the special permit to see what if anything, was done to address that. So I can't give you an answer, but you're not, again, you're not bringing up new territory. This is something that has been at least discussed in a past project.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, sir. You're not going to read all that.
No. Good evening, everyone. Scott Picken, 209 Bay Road. First, thanks for all being here. I know it's getting a little bit late, and it's far more intimidating in this room, even though it's small, than it is out watching that little TV there. So I read through the entire plan, as well as some of the planning board meetings of other towns that went through this, and I feel like I have a very good understanding of it. I'd love to talk to anyone offline if they'd like to get my understanding of what's going on. I won't get into all that detail today, but I have annotated the entire document. Would love to share it with anyone that would like to spend time with me on it. I would like to call out a few things of clarification here. I'm an engineer, electrical engineer by education and by trade, and even though the document that was passed around for noise levels is technically accurate, it's not applicable to the real world. Whenever you do a sound measurement, it is true that it is a pressure level reading, but it is requiring that you have a baseline environment. So you need to understand first what the noise level is before you add another device onto it. I'd equate this to the classroom with kids or a crowd at a stadium where everyone's probably talking or shouting at the same volume, but as a combined entity, the noise level increases. I got the impression that there's 2 inverters there, so the individual 65 decibel, 40 decibel is probably lower than what it would be in reality. You also need to consider the other solar field that is there, as well as all the other hums and things that are going on in the environment. So I would propose to the planning board or to Sun Energy, if there'd be maybe an agreement that we could come to, that you take real world data as a baseline today, and if this does pass take another assessment. Then you'll know exactly kind of the delta of what's going on here. But you should also be prepared that if the levels go beyond an acceptable threshold, what you're willing to do about it. I'd like to also suggest that same similar technology or science applies to the EMF, electrical fields or magnetic fields. Regardless if it is hazardous or not, we could build tons of information that supports, one strategy or the other. So I would make another proposal to either Sun Energy or to the planning board to make sure that we have a very clear agreement. How do we take a baseline of that? I believe, don't hold me to it, but I believe the National Grid will do those surveys for free if you're a customer. I'm not sure, so you'd have to check me on that. But they can do a triple access EMF field reading, and they could do it at all the butters. You could pick a select few that are the closest, like some of my neighbors here. And then you could understand what that baseline magnetic field or electromagnetic field is. Then you could, after the construction, if it does occur, take another reading. And you could do it on a regular basis, whether it's yearly or bi-yearly, whatever it was, to make sure that any minor defects in the inverters or any of the technology, if it were to oscillate at a different frequency, it could change that field. Regardless of if it's hazardous or not, everyone would then have the numbers. 15 years from now, we may find out there's a new science out there that looks at this in a different way, and we find causal analysis. May not exist today, but 12, 18, 19, okay, the last year that this thing could be in service for effective life, what if new science comes out that now identifies that certain thresholds do? People would, at least in the town, have the information to make a decision for themselves, whether they want to move or put additional protection in place. I think that's something that is, regardless if this goes through or not, I think it's something that is data-driven, and it's very easy to do, moderate cost, and I think there could be a reoccurring plan that could be, well documented, and everyone have the ability to get access to that information. The other aspect of this is, in some of my careers, I did electrical safety testing for insurance companies, and it was a notified body that certified electrical equipment. And part of that, in a lot of engineering worlds, do what's called a failure modes and effects analysis, an FMEA. That's a study that's done by the engineering team that develops not only the product, but how those products interconnect to build a system. And one thing that I would recommend is that the planning board at least get some third party involved to look at the analysis as a total system for that FMEA. And typically what's done is you identify different failure modes that could happen, what's the effect, and then what's the result to either humans or environment or wildlife. It'd be interesting to just look at the assessment that Sun Energy has done with an FMEA. You could do it behind closed doors if there's any proprietary information in there. But if you take that approach, you can understand that if someone is knee-deep in there, while these panels are energized, if they accidentally bump a tool into one of these wires and break the ground or energize the water that they're in, what kind of hazards can happen then? They're not likely. The failure mode and effects analysis that they've done may show that it's within such a statistical level of acceptance that they're willing to do this. But I think that assessment should be shared with the planning board so that you guys can make a decision on whether the town of Norton is willing to take that as well. If any event ever did happen, even a minor one, and it caused a significant injury or a death, heaven forbid, I think that's something that is just basic science and engineering principles that aren't being addressed here, but they're fundamental pieces here. Just like the NFPA 1, the fire code, or NFPA 70, the electrical code. All those codes are there, but how you interconnect them is a real analysis that needs to be done and may give the residents that are adjacent and abutters, as well as the entire town, if this is what we want to do and really go after it, do we have the engineering and the data that we can rely on in the future? Being on 209 Bay Road, I looked through the gravel pit there, and it is deciduous trees, so in the wintertime, you can clearly see through it. I have some pictures on my phone. I'll be glad to share with any of you after if you'd like to see it. But I think that, this time of year, it's really a beautiful scene. I moved to 209 Bay Road in 2011, and we moved there just because it was just a delight. The environment was great. The neighborhood was excellent. And, we purchased our house from a landscaper, so, the frontage and everything around it was really nice. So, I struggle a little bit with the idea of tearing down all the landscaping that we've invested in the front to protect myself in the view. And I struggle with what options could be there, but we could be open to having some discussions on what is suitable. So, but thanks for this time, and I hope you all have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
George Aventinus, 207 Bay Road. I'm not as smart as him, I'll say that first. But I do have a few questions. The profit, what kind of profit is the company gonna make off of this? What do you guys get out of it, that we're only getting 200,000?
We generally think about it as an internal rate of return, and we target between an 8 to 9% rate of return on our projects.
9%.
I didn't hear the answer. I didn't hear the answer.
An 8 to 9% internal rate of return
Of what? 8 to 9% of what?
of the money invested in the project.
And how much of it are you investing in the project? Because we know you're buying the land after you're leasing it, right?
We would be buying the land up front. We would never
Oh, yeah.
lease the land.
Okay, so wait. And then you'll be buying, it says that you'll be buying the land of the 205 acres after, or something says, after 190 days, I think it said it, land?
That's, the document in the submittal is an option agreement, so that reserves our right to purchase the property.
And if you do buy it, are more panels gonna go? Do we have a guarantee that you won't put more panels on there? You know?
We're happy to put a condition in a permit that we would not
I think that's
expand.
important, that would go in there.
Oh, hold on, what, madam? Again, unless you didn't hear the answer, which I know, his answer was that they plan for an 8 to 9% return on investment.
And what was the investment? That's what I don't
Okay,
understand.
what's the total investment if you're prepared to answer that?
The total cost of the project is uncertain at this point. It's going to depend on the cost of the solar panels.
Give us a number.
Well, it's going to be somewhere around, it's going to be somewhere around $20 million.
Yeah, 200,000 a year, not bad, guys. I don't know, I think for us, it's not good, for that much. I think we could get more if we're gonna do this.
You know, for better or worse, that's what we're getting.
Okay, well, I just don't think it's right. The other thing is, I live at 207. I'd like to see what kind of greens would go in there. Just not what you're saying. I want guarantees, and I'd like to see pictures. I have 2 little boys, they all play there, the neighbors' kids play there. The water, we use the water, we're on well water. What kind of guarantees do we have that nothing happens to that? My other question is, I feel like we haven't spent enough time, and you guys haven't done your due diligence, because you should have known about Blue View, number 1. Okay, little mistake there. But you guys cannot tell me you did not know about 222 Bay Road and how close it was. You don't even have it marked up here. You didn't even bring it up. Okay, they just bought that house a little while ago. They're a young family, they got a newborn on the way, and they didn't do their homework. And if they say they did, and they walked it, but they left it out. And that's not fair to anyone here.
If I could respond to that, we actually just earlier had a lengthy discussion with the owner of 222 Bay Road.
Yes, I know that, yeah.
And we do know his property's there, and we didn't, it was a misstatement when we said that it wasn't there.
I understand, yeah. Now it's a misstatement because you got caught. It feels like that there hasn't been enough homework done on this whole property for this size.
I take significant issue with that. I've been working on this project for 9 months. We've been doing a lot of homework on the property, on the program, on the overall viability of it. And like I said before, the issue with the Blue View Nursery has to do with the deed transfer not being recorded, or at least not showing up in the.
I get that part, but, I think we can't just go voting on it because we got to put that all in there. I think that's very important that we find out about these things. Gentlemen, I've been here 20 years. I love it. Love knowing I came from Brockton, and I came here because it's a great place to bring a family. I don't want to move because there's solar panels, tons of them. Like I knew about the solar panels at Filey Lane. I had no problem. They were covered up. I checked it out. You know what I mean? Did my homework on it. There was no need to fight it. They do make noise. There's no doubt about it. We know they do. How much of noise to my family? I'm not too sure. I can't be honest. But I am worried about it. But I just feel like we're rushing. We're really rushing. There's no need to rush. I don't know if we're on the deadline with the state. But we really got to think about us. We paid our taxes. We came here, because we love this town. Everything's great about this town. And let's not rush just to sell out for money. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, and then, only because I saw him first, and then you, madam.
Brian Falconer, 11 Fuller Drive. My voice is scratchy from the Patriots game, so excuse me. So I just have a statement to make. If all of the abutters and property owners that live close that pay taxes, which we just bought our house and moved in 3 months ago, if we had all of our properties reassessed, tax revenue would go down, correct?
No.
It wouldn't.
Because what would happen, it's complicated, but your value goes down. If everyone's value was cut in half townwide, the tax rate would double to offset that. So the value is really, the town is not affected by lowering the tax.
Well, I obviously agree with everybody's opinion here. I think this is an abomination, and for $200,000 a year, you got to do more testing, and you got to think this through. So that's all I have to say.
Madam?
Georgina Arventitis, 207 Bay Road, or Gina, either one. Everyone calls me Gina. So
Excuse me, just to clarify, are you the same address as the other?
my husband is George and Georgine, yes,
Okay.
it's cute.
You want to get rid of them?
So I just want to echo, again, the health concern is a major concern of mine. I have been spending endless hours, days, since I found out this was happening, of the effects of EMF. We are not clear on the effects. We have 2 young boys, 7 years old and 12 years old, as well as many other neighbors who have children. I do not feel comfortable living in front, excuse me. It's a real concern of mine, the health of my family and my children. And I don't think we should be quick to jump and say, oh, no, there's been some studies. I think we've already talked about that, and that's been established. I do want to talk about, I have done a little bit of research on the Holliston and Hopkinton solar farm. That was shut down. They didn't move forward on that because of toxic chemicals in the panels. Can you speak to, you said there were no chemicals in the panels earlier. Am I understanding that correctly? What are the panels made of?
So I'm not familiar with the examples you're raising. There are different types of solar panels.
Okay.
The solar panels that we are using, which is the most typical solar panel used, is a crystalline silicon solar panel.
Okay.
Silicon is made from sand. The other major components are the glass cover, which is made from sand, and then the aluminum frame, and some electrical conductors.
Okay, so-
which constitute toxic material.
Okay, so is that silicon material the polysilicon? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I have been doing a little bit of research, and I found that there has been, it says the SVTC warns that solar panel production creates many of the same toxic byproducts found in semiconductor production, including silicone, tetrachloride, dust, greenhouse gases like sulfur hexafluoride. These silicon tetrachloride, for example, makes land unsuitable for growing crops. So you're saying you're preserving these cranberry bogs, but on the other hand, there has been research and evidence saying that that can't happen with the production of cranberries. Can you help me understand how that's possible if it's not suitable? If the land isn't suitable for crops, how are these cranberry bogs supposed to grow?
Yes. What you're referring to is the actual production or manufacturing
Yes.
of the solar panels, which
Okay.
is what we're not doing on site. These
Okay.
panels are manufactured largely in China, which is where there are some of those effects.
Okay.
Which is a result of the manufacturing process, but not associated with
Okay.
the materials within the solar panels themselves.
Great,
So those impacts are not Unfortunately, for the folks living near those solar production facilities in China, they are feeling the effects of that. But that is not felt wherever the solar panels are placed.
And can you also clarify, you said you would give us some information based on those other projects that have been done, where cranberry bogs or other crops were planted under them, that they were successful? Is that something that you spoke about earlier? I'm not sure of the detail, but can you?
So what I said earlier was this is a very new program. We do not have any dual-use solar projects in operation.
Yeah.
There are a couple. There's one pilot project at UMass Amherst. There's a couple projects, I believe, in Vermont and New York, but I'm not aware of any existing dual-use projects in Massachusetts. Okay. What we do have pictures of are the really robust health of the cranberry vines underneath a bog, underneath a standard solar project that was installed on a cranberry bog in Carver about 3 years ago.
Okay, so what happens if you come in, do this, no cranberries? Something happened along the way, and here we go. This doesn't happen. How is that? I mean, isn't that what part of this plan is, that the cranberry bogs will still be organically
Yes, so
harvested or whatever?
We'll continue the organic cultivation of the cranberry bogs.
Okay.
We are required to continue active operation or active farming, cultivation
Okay.
of every square foot of the area that has solar
yeah.
panels over it, and we'll also be continuing agriculture operation on every square foot
Okay.
of the bogs that do not have solar panels on it, which is the other half of the bogs, essentially.
So potentially half of the cranberry bogs could be gone?
I wouldn't say
It
that.
could possibly, I mean, is it fair to say that these may not survive with all of what's happening? I'm just trying to get a better understanding.
It's certainly uncertain what the productivity will be.
A lot of this is.
But based on the evidence that we have so far from the cranberry bogs with solar projects on top of them that are less suitable to the ongoing health of the cranberry vines than our design is, those bogs are doing fine, as well as the pilot project at UMass Amherst that was tested over about 8 different crops that are all producing at least half of what they were without solar panel canopy on top of them.
Okay. Plans also mention leaks, that they'll be cleaned up. Where will these leaks be coming from? I'm not sure what there was, like something about if something spills and leaks and.
And I'm happy to look if there's a specific note, but I think what you may be
Yes.
referring to, if it was on the plan set that you saw it, or
I'm not sure what it was.
The stormwater management report includes an operation and maintenance plan, and a plan, so it's a requirement when you're doing land disturbance that involves equipment, that you have plans for if the gas leaks or there's an oil leak from equipment or things like that. So that's the leaks that's referring to as construction-specific equipment. Not the solar panels or kind of the post-construction.
But after post-construction, there'll be no leaks, nothing at all, because we are right across the street, 207 Bay Road, right there. And we have well water. It's a huge concern of mine if there's possible added toxins getting in there. I'm not sure how it works, but it's a big concern of mine. So is there a possibility of leaks? And what would it be?
Right, so the solar panels have inert materials, as Adam mentioned. The tracking is with an electric motor, so there's no hydraulics working. So I'm not aware of anything
Nothing
that
could ever,
would be leaking.
nothing could leak, ever.
Agree.
Guaranteed. I have your word,
You
right?
got my word.
Okay.
On that subject, do the inverters have PCBs, batteries? Is there a secondary containment system for any of that?
The transformers have an oil containment system built into them. The batteries themselves are housed in shipping containers, which serves as essentially the redundant or the fail-safe barrier in the event that there is something that goes wrong with the batteries.
And none of that is over bogs, that's all on the hard.
Correct.
Okay.
Panels or the stands around rust?
What's that?
The panels or the stands around rust?
The panels are rust resistant because the only metal is the aluminum frame,
And what about the stands that they're on?
galvanized steel.
Okay, so I think I'm asking if you guys to strongly consider the town of Norton's people's opinion and concerns when moving forward with this or whatever the next step may be. Unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of time to really read a lot and become educated on this. Unfortunately, we've only had days where this has been in plans for at least 9 months, and we didn't know. So I would just ask that you strongly consider everything that we are asking and questioning.
Well, let me just say this to the audience. I don't think it comes to any surprise. I don't think any of the members of the board will take issue with me that this isn't going to be decided tonight, that this will be continued at least until the next meeting of February 5th. Before we leave tonight, at least I and other members of the board will be asking you to provide some additional detail on some subjects, but lest anyone think that we're going to decide on this tonight, that's not going to happen. But
Well, I do understand there's one other meeting after this next week.
well, the Conservation Commission is meeting.
It's
That's
different?
that's a separate.
It's totally separate, okay.
Well, I mean, it's
Is
on
there-
this project, but they look at it from some different considerations. But again, we're not going to either close this hearing or.
And it would need to go through
decide.
both panels individually.
Okay, so is the Board of Health going to be a part of any of this? Because I did send out a whole bunch of emails, I forget who suggested it, but they did say that I should reach out to the Board of Health, which I have emailed them, but I just wasn't sure if they would be part of any of this, because our health is a very big concern, and is that something that we could do?
As a normal course of events, the Board of Health would not be involved in this. However, if you were to present information to them that was so compelling that they felt that from a health standpoint they need to get involved, I'd leave that to them to
Okay,
take up.
fair enough.
But as part of this process, they are not involved.
The health agent is. Health
Health
agent
agent?
is reviewing this.
Well, he's looked at it, but again,
Right.
they have no formal role to play. Just like the fire department will look at this for purposes of access, but they don't give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. They, communicate with us that these are some of the things they're concerned with, and we hope we incorporate whatever it is they need, they being the fire department, for purposes of access and the like. Similarly, the Board of Health, if they were to have issues, they have authority under their own rules and regulations to get involved, but they typically do not.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I, yes,
I'd just like to add one more thing, if you don't mind. Thank you. Mike Wagner, 211 Bay Road, directly across the street. It's a beautiful view. Sunsets are awesome, for now. My question is the chemical breakdown over time of these panels. It's going to rain a lot all the time. It's going to hit the cranberries. There's no studies. The only study I heard out of you is 150 mile an hour winds. Are these going to be moving at all, chattering? Anything going to fall in there in the bogs? There's rivers. My son's been fishing out there many times. That's a concern. There's well water. Anything going to get penetrate down enough? There's not enough study of this. There's no studies everywhere, anywhere. This is going to be the first in the state, correct? For cranberries, over cranberries.
Well, aside from the existing ones in Carver, this will be the first, this is the first dual-use Actually, sorry, that's not even true. There were a couple dual-use projects permitted in Carver a month or two ago. So this will be one of the first dual-use solar projects on Cranberry Bog.
But there's no studies at all in other countries, anywhere else regarding this? That we can see a study of 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, prolonged down the line? You know, because I understand solar panels, they do break down. What's the percentage of it right now as it sits if you put a brand-new panel out there?
Right, so the solar panels, their production degrades over
Yes.
time. And
So they need to
that's-
be replaced in time?
So the solar panels are warranted. They have a production guarantee of 25 years. And so that, and what that's from the manufacturer. And that guarantees that, that the solar panel will degrade at no more than 0.5% over time, or per year.
Yep.
For 25 years. And.
What's the percentage right now that the panel is making?
The percent efficiency of the panel.
From the sun hitting it, what's the percentage?
It's roughly 17% of and that's converting the total amount.
Because the light has to penetrate through.
Right, and it's not, the technology hasn't advanced to the point where it's capable of converting 100%.
Can rain penetrate through it, or is it runoff?
Runoff. And,
So there's no guarantee that the water down below is going to be crystal clean, but organic with their cranberries?
There is.
There's studies for that.
Well, there's not a specific study on cranberry bogs that I could point to. What I can point to is the manufacturer's warranty of the product, and there are a good amount of studies regarding solar panel production over time. That's where they've derived these production guarantees, because solar panels have actually been around since the 1950s.
Oh, yeah, solar is great. Believe me, it's awesome. It's a concept. We're going towards that way.
Yep.
But over vegetation that we're going to be eating.
Right.
Drinking, groundwater.
Right.
There's a lot of factors there, and there's no studies regarding that.
Yeah,
And length of time of studies.
And so what I was trying to say is there's a lot of research pointing to the actual solar panel's lifetime. And that research shows that the panel's production degrades over time.
Yep.
But the materials involved, the aluminum frame, the glass, the silicon cells, those don't disintegrate within.
Is there going to be any chattering? When these are moving around, high winds, are they going to be bumping into, they're pretty big.
They are pretty big, and no. These are very tightly secured to the racks. They have very strong aluminum
But it's like a
frames.
corkscrew that goes into the ground. There's no movement with that.
No. If the racks were if the racks were capable of moving in wind like that, that would not be anywhere close to meeting the wind requirements that they need to meet. So these are very robust systems. There's actually lots of documentation of solar projects withstanding Hurricane Sandy. I think some didn't make it through, but
What, 10 foot up in the air? Sorry.
no. So again, this is kind of a new concept. So, but the projects would be built to the same standards regardless of the height. So being raised 10 feet will require us to have essentially a deeper pier depth in order to maintain the same resistivity and the same strength as would be required if it were lower to the ground.
I'd love to hear studies, though, of this, where vegetation's underneath the solar, the water running off, pouring rain, snow melting, going into the watershed.
Yeah, I hear your concern on that, and I think the only thing that I can point to at this time is just that all of the materials in the solar panel themselves are inert. If there were to be degradation of the panels, which We do not expect, because of the way they're manufactured and because of the manufacturer's guarantees. But even if that were to happen, it would be inert materials going into the bog. And so, at least based on the information available to me today, I don't see an issue for concern there, although I do understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, I'd love to see it being more proactive than reactive.
But I don't want to cut this discussion off, but I'm going to have to delay it to our next meeting because the hour is getting late. There are a couple things that at least I would like to see brought forward for our next meeting, and I'll leave it to members of the board if they have some additional things. But one of the things we talked about earlier, but whatever requirements there are from an agricultural productivity standpoint that you need to maintain in order to remain qualified for the program, I'd like to see that. Obviously, there's been a couple of corrections that have been referenced that need to be made, one being the Cogliano property or the Blueview Nursery property, to see where that is. And I forget, was it 209, 222 Bay Road, if we could see that drawn in plan. We've talked in generalities in terms of screening, but as this thing moves along, we're going to have to see some specifics in terms of sight lines, proposed landscaping plans, particularly as it affects people on Bay Road, because that, I think, is your biggest challenge. But rather than simply saying, we're going to have to do some screening, we're going to have to see some specifics on that, line of sight, what you're proposing, and the like. Those are the things that I'd like to see addressed in our next go-around. Question, or just
Can you require them to provide studies that would talk about health, water, all these other things that concern you?
Well, if there are studies, the problem is, and I'm no expert in the field, that studies don't exist. I mean, in many cases, you can't prove a negative. And that's. Well, again, I will leave it to anyone who may have bona fide evidence that there are health risks. One of the things that we are going to want to talk about a little bit more is the impact of electromagnetic fields. You talked about there's no threat a meter away. That's a pretty bold statement. I'd like to see some documentation of that. And it would also be interesting if you have access to it. The electromagnetic field as it relates to this versus a cell tower or your toaster, anything else that gives the non-scientists, and I'm clearly in that category, some handle upon which to say, yeah, that's no worse than my TV, or that's as bad as a nuclear power plant. So that type of specificity would be useful to me. Members of the board, things that you'd like to see at our next meeting. Just, I'm going to ask you to limit it to.
It's very quick.
Okay.
Just a question. If this is going to continue on the 5th,
Yes.
is it possible for you to actually have handouts showing your site plan with everything that they talked about for everyone else? Because through most of this meeting, I've been down there, and I can't tell where anything really is on your plan, and it is very difficult to understand some of it. So is it possible to have handouts so that everyone can have it, or have this in a larger room? Either way?
We'd be happy to produce handouts. I don't know how many would be appropriate, 50 or, I don't know, how many people are here, I don't know.
And I can only, again, guess. I have no way of predicting how many people will be here on the 5th.
But it's something too that can be left in the town hall, so people who cannot get to it. I know when Lemon Street happened, I was not able to get there for certain things. I was able to pick up a copy of the site plan from here. It was left in the front hall. That way, everybody, like you said, I mean, I was not aware of a lot of this, and for whatever reason, but this way, it just gives another chance for people to come and get it.
Yeah,
You can pick
I
one
mean,
up and hand it to your
whatever we
friend.
have can be made available in the planning office upstairs, and I would ask you that whatever it is that you anticipate providing, that you do so as early as possible so that people have access to it, because the more open questions can be closed, the quicker we can make a decision on this, rather than having to delay because people haven't had a chance to review.
Is it a potential to see if there's a larger venue available for the 5th?
We can do that, although, again.
It may or may not work, but.
I guess the point that I was trying to make that I never got to was that I'm guessing this is as many people as we're going to have, and I apologize, this isn't the most luxurious of facilities, but I think everyone got in. Frankly, if you get a sense that, hey, I've talked to my neighbors, we're going to have more people, if you could communicate that to Paul. I mean, we do want to provide, people access to this whole discussion, but by the same token, if we're just going to move to another facility, that sometimes creates a problem for cable TV to broadcast it. And if it's to no avail, and that is to say, if we have fewer people, the same number of people, then what have we done that for? But again, if you folks have a sense and talk to your neighbors, we're going to have 20% more or whatever, communicate that to Paul, and we'll do what we can to find a larger facility.
So Joe, are we able to go live at the library?
I don't, Shane, I think we can go live at the library?
You have, not the way it's set up right now, no.
Would be recorded. We had explored the media center, which you could do live, which of course is their facility, which is actually quite a nice facility, and it's a bit bigger than this.
So you know, the room out here is full.
Are there people in the hall? Thank you for telling me that. I didn't realize that. Thank you for telling me that.
That's why I figured we had these hands, it'd be much easier.
Yep. No,
The
you're
media
fine.
center does not have a full complement of chairs.
Maybe we can figure something out, but.
Your own chair.
All right, we will look for an alternate site, provided that doesn't have a cost on the other side that, in terms of media, television, or some other application. But again, in terms of things that we'd like to see brought to the table next time around, anything?
Maybe just if there's any more specificity in regards to noise, because obviously that's a concern of many that was brought up tonight. There's some general information and studies, but really more specifics of, this specific installation and everything factored in what that would consist of and what that, net impact would be. If there is ability to do a baseline study, we need to understand what that is and when that could possibly take place. So any additional information surrounding that topic would be helpful.
And again, speaking for myself, one of the concerns I have as the proposal, as the project is currently proposed, is I have real concerns with the for lack of a better word, the buffer, the minimal distance, the simple 50 feet along Bay Road, and I'd be interested in seeing whether that can be either repositioned so that there is more of a buffer. Again, 50 feet is not much more than from here to the wall. And I've always been concerned with that as a distance. So I will be asking as a member of the board, what is it that you can do to increase that, or how are you going to mitigate the fact that it's so close to that property line?
A lot of the concern that I noted was had to do with the panels and degradation possibilities, getting into the ground. So anything that you can bring or put forward as far as, you reference the warranty on the panels and.
It's actually in the big booklet here.
Yeah, well, maybe something that can be broken down, or a link that we can give to the residents, or something that they can take a look at on their own prior to the next meeting.
Sure.
You had mentioned that this project has to be a certain size in order to make it work. However, I like to see modifications to see if this can actually be smaller than what it currently is. So not to give you too much, more work, but I do want to see possible new blueprints to see if it should be 100 feet as opposed to 50 feet, if not moving everything away from the main road. So.
We'll take that back and look at it.
Thank you.
Any other homework assignments in the?
No, I think that's a pretty good list. I guess I'm curious personally about the soil type and whether or not you can drill far enough down for the 10-foot panel. Obviously, that's very tall. If you're talking about a lot of sand in the bogs, how far down are you gonna have to go to really secure those panels? Is there better, for lack of a better word, soil underneath?
Yes, so the upland bogs, all of these bogs were created out of upland, meaning they weren't historically wetland areas.
Yeah, they were dug out.
They have a gravel bottom.
Okay.
And these bogs, we don't yet know the exact depth of the peat and sand. That's something that we will determine in our subsurface investigations. But all cranberry bogs, in order to function as a cranberry bog, have what's known as hard pan, which is an impermeable layer in order to keep water in the bogs. And that is typically found from a depth of 3 to 4 feet down to 10 to 12 feet. And so that's well within the range of what we can work with from an engineering perspective in terms of driving piers down to that depth. And if necessary, the easiest approach is to use the standard I-beam.
Right.
But if we need to, we can use a helical pier, which provides additional support even within that sandy and peaty layer, if that hard pan is deeper than what we expect it will be.
Okay.
Actually, only because it's getting late, and this is going to be, again, discussed at some length.
What's related to the drilling? Does that create a vibration?
It's not something perceptible.
I have a pool that's 50 feet from this, so it's a cement patio. You're gonna be drilling.
I mean, it's a vibratory pile driver.
Yeah, it's a
so
micropile.
It's it advances it with using essentially pounding. But yeah, the extent of where those vibrations would be felt, I don't know.
So I'm
off
right
the
next
top
to
of
the
my head.
access road, so
Okay. And I think that's something that we would know more about once we know what the actual subsurface is that we're driving into. I don't have a good answer as to the radius of where those effects would be felt.
I'm going to ask the board if there's a motion to continue this to February 5th.
So moved.
At a location still to be
Second.
determined. There's been a motion and seconded, Steve and Steve, to
Yes.
continue this,
Jason J.
the public hearing on a special permit to February 5th. All in, discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And again, folks, I certainly don't, but the hour's getting late, and we've got a couple more odds and ends to finish up. Whether the meeting is going to be here or somewhere else, that'll be posted and okay. The only other item is the A&R that Mr. again.
Yeah, Mr. Bukevich.
Mr. Bukevich doesn't appear to have shown up. And since we have a couple of questions, I think it only appropriate that we continue that until at our next meeting, February 5th.
I'll move to that end.
I'll second it.
Okay. Tim and Steve H.
I'll be Steve Warren. How about that?
Steve 1? That's presumptuous, isn't it?
Steve A.
Oh,
Steve.
oh.
Oh, yeah. Be Steve A then, you can be Steve 1.
Which is good for a change. The H works, don't worry.
Okay, anything else for tonight? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
We adjourn.
Second.
There's been a motion seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.